When darkness falls on America's untamed wilderness, when campfires fade to embers and the forest comes alive, ancient legends stir. From the Appalachian hollows to the endless pine forests, stories whisper of things that shouldn't exist. Creatures born from folklore, fed by forgotten history, waiting in the shadows beyond your tent. These are the tales park rangers won't tell, the experiences campers dare not speak. Welcome back, friend. Tonight we venture into the American wild, where every shadow has a story, and every story has teeth. Subscribe, and venture deeper into the darkness with us. An important message to all my subscribers. I need your help to protect my content. I own 2 official YouTube channels. The first is Midnight Stories, with 24,000 subscribers. The second is Mr. Midnight, with 6,000 subscribers. These are the only 2 channels that are authorized to publish my stories and narrations. If you ever find any other channel uploading my content without permission, please report it immediately. To report, go to the video, tap the 3 dots, select Report, then choose Spam or Misleading, then select Scams or Fraud. Your support means everything to me. Every single report helps protect the original content I work hard to create for you. Thank you for standing by my side. 20 years in forced service changes a man. I've worked as a ranger now for 12 years of my time, and in all my time working for the government, I've never encountered anything out of the ordinary. That is, until my last station job as a ranger at Gooseberry Falls State Park in Minnesota. It was quite possibly one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had while on duty, and certainly not something I'll ever forget. Well, to explain how it happened, we need to go back about 6 months. Before that incident, I had been planning on retiring. My son had just graduated college and was looking to move closer to Minneapolis. So once he made the offer that he would work part-time with me while he looked for a full-time position, I decided to pass up retirement and stay on the job. By the way, I should make a note that this was all pre-COVID. I had heard rumors of management positions opening up in the area, so after discussing it with him, we both agreed that he would come back home for around 6 months while I waited for the opportunity to present itself. When I first told my supervisor, Dave, about my decision to postpone retirement, he seemed oddly relieved. Something in his expression suggested more than just administrative convenience. "You're making the right call, Mike," he said, shuffling papers on his desk without meeting my eyes. "Gooseberry needs experienced rangers right now." The way he emphasized experienced struck me as peculiar, but I chalked it up to standard government bureaucracy. Maybe budget cuts were looming, or perhaps they were understaffed. Either way, the extra income would help with my mortgage, and working alongside my son, Ethan, would be a welcome change from the solitude that had defined my career since his mother passed. My transfer papers to Gooseberry Falls came through quickly, suspiciously so, given the usual glacial pace of departmental approvals. The personnel director handed me the packet with a thin smile. "You'll be stationed in the North Quadrant," she said. "It's quieter up there." Again, something in her tone gave me pause. 20 years in this line of work teaches you to read between the lines, to sense when information is being withheld. But the prospect of showing Ethan the ropes, of passing along my knowledge before finally hanging up my uniform, overshadowed any misgivings. The drive up to Gooseberry Falls took just over 2 hours from our home in the suburbs. Ethan sat beside me in the passenger seat, his enthusiasm palpable as we wound through the increasingly dense forest. "Did you know Gooseberry Falls has 5 waterfalls?" he asked, reading from a park brochure. "Upper, middle, and lower falls on the main river, plus 5th Falls and another one that's not even on the map." "Not on the map?" I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, some local legend. Says here it's called Lucifer Falls," he chuckled. "Sounds ominous." I kept my eyes on the road, but something cold settled in my stomach. "Probably just a story they tell tourists," I said, though even to my own ears, my voice lacked conviction. As we approached the ranger station, the late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the gravel parking lot. The main building was a sturdy log structure, weathered but well-maintained, with the United States Park Service emblem prominently displayed above the entrance. Tom Hadley, a ranger I'd worked with years before at Boundary Waters, greeted us at the door. Time hadn't been kind to Tom. Deep lines creased his leathery face, and his once robust frame had grown gaunt. Still, his handshake was firm, and his smile seemed genuine enough. "Mike Wilson," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Never thought I'd see you up in these parts." "Needed a change of scenery," I replied, introducing Ethan. "My son's joining the team, at least temporarily." Tom's smile faltered for just a moment as he shook Ethan's hand. "Welcome aboard, kid. Hope you enjoy your time here." The emphasis on time wasn't lost on me. We followed Tom inside, where he introduced us to the staff. There was Jenny Carter, a wildlife biologist in her 30s with keen eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Marcus Lee, a maintenance worker whose massive hands looked capable of bending steel. And Sarah Donovan, the head ranger, whose silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a severe bun. Sarah took over from Tom, leading us to a small conference room where orientation would begin. "We're glad to have you, Mike," she said, her voice carrying the slight lilt of a Minnesota accent. "Especially someone with your experience. The falls can be unpredictable." I nodded, though her choice of words struck me as odd. Waterfalls, by their very nature, are among the most predictable natural features. Water flows downstream, gravity does its work, end of story. But I'd soon learn that at Gooseberry Falls, the natural order of things wasn't as reliable as I'd been taught. As Sarah went through the standard orientation park boundaries, emergency procedures, radio protocols, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something, that beneath the routine information lay another layer of knowledge being deliberately withheld. "One last thing," Sarah said, closing her binder. "We have a strict policy about night patrols around the falls, always in pairs, never alone, and always with full communication equipment." "Any particular reason?" I asked. The room fell silent. Sarah and Tom exchanged a glance that lasted a beat too long. "Safety," Tom finally said. "The terrain gets treacherous in the dark, easy to lose your footing." I'd been a ranger long enough to know when I was being fed the official line rather than the whole truth, but I also knew better than to push too hard on my first day. There would be time to uncover whatever they were hiding. As we left the conference room, Ethan leaned close. "Is it just me," he whispered, "or is everyone here acting weird?" I squeezed his shoulder. "Just standard new job jitters," I assured him, though I didn't believe it myself. "We'll settle in soon enough." That night, in the small cabin assigned to us on the park grounds, I unpacked my few belongings while Ethan showered. Through the window, I could see the distant silhouette of trees against the night sky, and beyond them, the faint sound of rushing water, the falls that had given this place its name, and perhaps its secrets. Little did I know that in less than a week, I would stand at the edge of those falls, staring into an abyss that would forever change my understanding of the natural world and of humanity itself. I was first introduced to Gooseberry Falls State Park during my orientation as a ranger there, and they took us out into the park at nighttime. It was an amazing sight, getting to see all these bright campfires down below, from way above on top of the waterfalls. The second day of orientation began with a sunrise tour of the park's main attractions. Sarah led the way, pointing out the visitor center, the most popular hiking trails, and the emergency access roads that crisscross the 687 acres of protected land. "We get about 600 visitors annually," she explained as we walked along a well-maintained path toward the sound of rushing water. "Most of them come for the falls, of course." As we rounded a bend in the trail, the lower falls came into Viewa, 30-foot cascade of water tumbling over ancient volcanic rock, the morning sunlight catching in the spray to form ephemeral rainbows. Despite my years in the service, the sight took my breath away. "It's beautiful," Ethan said beside me, his face alight with wonder. "Wait until you see it at night," Tom replied, joining us at the railing. "Nothing like it in the world." Something in his tone made me glance his way. Tom's eyes were fixed on the churning water below, his expression unreadable. Before I could question him further, Sarah called us over to continue the tour. Throughout the day, we familiarized ourselves with the park's layout, the camping areas, and the emergency procedures specific to Gooseberry Falls. By late afternoon, my feet ached, and I could see Ethan was flagging as well. "Just one more thing on the agenda," Sarah announced as we made our way back to the ranger station. "Night orientation." "Can't that wait until tomorrow?" I asked, checking my watch. The sun would be setting in less than an hour. "It's important," Tom interjected, his voice unusually firm, "especially for understanding the unique challenges of patrolling after dark. There it was again, that sense of something left unsaid, of information being parceled out on a need-to-know basis. My instincts, honed by 2 decades of service, told me to press the issue, but the exhaustion of the day made me reconsider. Better to observe and learn, I decided. We took a brief break for dinner at the station, sandwiches and coffee from a thermos before gathering our gear for the night tour. Sarah distributed high-powered flashlights and radio handsets to each of us. "Stay in visual contact at all times," she instructed, her tone leaving no room for argument. "The terrain can be deceptive after dark." As we set out, the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the tree line, plunging the forest into deep shadow. Our flashlight beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the path ahead in stark contrasts of light and absence. The night sounds of the forest surrounded us, the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, the distant hooting of an owl, and always the constant background murmur of the falls. We followed Sarah in single file, with Tom bringing up the rear. Between us walked Jenny and Marcus, with Ethan and me in the middle of the formation. "We're heading to Overlook Point," Sarah called back over her shoulder. "Best view of the entire park." The trail steepened as we ascended, the packed earth giving way to exposed rock that gleamed dully in our flashlight beams. I found myself breathing harder, the exertion combining with the thin mountain air to make each step more demanding than the last. Finally, we emerged onto a flat outcropping of rock. Sarah gestured for us to switch off our flashlights, and one by one the beams winked out, leaving us in what at first seemed like total darkness. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized we were standing at the edge of a precipice, with the vast expanse of the park spread out below us. It was an amazing sight, getting to see all these bright campfires down below, from way above on top of the waterfalls. The rocks around the falls are very smooth and slippery due to years and years of erosion. You have to be careful if you want to climb down to view the falls at night. "This is what most people come to Gooseberry for," Sarah said softly, her silhouette barely visible against the star-strewn sky. "But it's also where we have the most accidents." "People falling?" Ethan asked. Sarah nodded. "The rocks around the falls are very smooth and slippery due to years and years of erosion. You have to be careful if you want to climb down to view the falls at night." "Why would anyone want to climb down in the dark?" I asked, peering over the edge. The drop appeared to be at least 100 feet, ending in a churning pool of water at the base of the middle falls. "The locals have a tradition," Tom said, moving to stand beside me. "They say if you descend to the bottom of the falls under a full moon, you can hear the voices of those who came before." Jenny scoffed. "Tourist nonsense." "Maybe," Tom conceded, but his tone suggested otherwise. "But it doesn't stop people from trying. That's why we patrol the upper trails after dark, to catch the thrill seekers before they break their necks." As we stood there, taking in the view, I noticed something odd. Despite the clear night, there seemed to be patches of darkness moving among the trees below, shadows that were somehow deeper than the surrounding night, flowing against the wind like liquid. "What's that?" I asked, pointing. Everyone followed my gesture, but by the time they looked, the strange shadows had disappeared, leaving only the normal patterns of darkness among the trees. "Probably just clouds passing over the moon," Marcus suggested, though the sky was clear of clouds. "Or bats," Jenny offered. "We have several colonies in the caves near the lower falls." Neither explanation satisfied me, but I let it drop. My unease, however, continued to grow. Our group had just finished our tour and was going to head back towards our cars when one of my coworkers, Tom, suggested that we climb down the falls, just, for the sake of it. "Well, time to head back," Sarah announced, switching on her flashlight. "It's getting late, and we've got an early start tomorrow." Our group had just finished our tour and was going to head back towards our cars when one of my coworkers, Tom, suggested that we climb down the falls, just, for the sake of it. "Are you serious?" Sarah turned to him, her flashlight beam catching him full in the face. "You know that's against protocol." Tom blinked in the harsh light, but his expression remained determined. "Come on, Sarah. How better to teach the rookies about the dangers than to show them firsthand? We're all experienced rangers here." "Except for Ethan," I pointed out, instinctively moving closer to my son. "He'll be fine with us looking out for him," Tom insisted. "Besides, it's not like we're going all the way to the bottom, just down to the first ledge." Sarah hesitated, clearly torn between enforcing the rules and the practical value of the demonstration. "It's dangerous, Tom. You know that better than anyone." A strange expression flickered across Tom's face, something between defiance and, was that fear? But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. That's exactly why we should do it, he pressed. So Mike and Ethan understand what they're up against when they have to rescue some drunk college kids from the same spot. I could see Sarah wavering. What do you think, Mike? She asked. You're the veteran here. All eyes turned to me. My instincts screamed caution, but I was also acutely aware of my position as the newcomer. Refusing might brand me as overly cautious or, worse, cowardly in the eyes of my new colleagues. We'll be careful, I said finally, and we won't go far. Sarah sighed, clearly outvoted. Fine. But we stay together, maintain radio contact, and at the first sign of trouble, we turn back. Understood? We all nodded our agreement, though I couldn't help noticing the look that passed between Jenny and Marcusa's silent communication I couldn't interpret but which raised the hairs on the back of my neck. I agreed, and we should have known better, and so did a handful of others who were nearby. Tom led the way, his flashlight beam dancing over the rocks as he began the descent. Sarah followed, then Jenny and Marcus. I gestured for Ethan to go next, keeping him between me and the others where I could keep an eye on him. The path, if it could be called that, was treacherous from the start. The rocks were indeed smooth from centuries of water flowing over them, and in places, a thin film of moisture made them as slippery as ice. We moved slowly, testing each foothold before committing our weight. As soon as we began climbing down, I sensed something wasn't right, but being fearless, I pushed those feelings aside as nothing more than nerves. It started out easy. Everyone traveling downward in a single file behind each other, staying close and yet far enough apart for safety's sake. The night air grew noticeably cooler as we descended, the spray from the falls creating a fine mist that clung to our clothes and skin. The roar of water grew louder, making conversation impossible without shouting. Instead, we communicated with hand signals and the occasional flash of light. About halfway down, I paused to catch my breath and check on Ethan. He was doing well, moving with the natural agility of youth, though I could see the concentration on his face as he navigated the difficult terrain. Below us, Tom had reached a relatively flat ledge that jutted out over the falls. He turned and waved, signaling that this was our destination. One by one, the others joined him, until only Ethan and I remained on the upper section. Almost there, I called to Ethan over the noise of the falls. Take it slow. He nodded, carefully testing a rock with his foot before shifting his weight. But as he moved, I saw his foot slipe a small adjustment, quickly corrected but enough to send a jolt of adrenaline through my system. Careful, I shouted. Ethan flashed me a reassuring smile, but I could see the nervousness in his eyes now. The initial excitement of the adventure was giving way to a healthy respect for the danger. Then, around 3/4 of the way down, things began to get a bit more dangerous. Tom fell. I didn't see him do it, but I heard the commotion. One of my other coworkers had seen what had happened, yelling up to us that he needed help getting Tom back up the rocks. 2 guys rushed down to assist in whatever way they could. From my position, I couldn't see exactly what had happened, but the sudden commotion was unmistakable. Flashlight beams jerked wildly, illuminating fragments of the scene below an outstretched hand, a look of panic, the spray of water catching the light like thousands of tiny diamonds. Stay where you are, I called to Ethan, who had frozen in place at the sound of the shouts. I'm going to see what happened. I began to descend more quickly, my concern for Tom temporarily overriding my caution. As I neared the ledge, I could see Marcus and Jenny bent over a prone form Tom, lying on his back, his face contorted in pain. What happened? I demanded, kneeling beside them. The rock gave way under him, Jenny explained, her voice tight with worry. He went down hard on his ankle. I think it might be broken. Tom grimaced, attempting to sit up. I'm fine, he insisted, though the pallor of his face belied his words. Just a sprain. We need to get him back up, Marcus said, already assessing the best way to move Tom without causing further injury. It's going to be a challenge on these rocks. I nodded, quickly formulating a plan. Sarah, you and Jenny stabilize his ankle as best you can. Marcus and I will take point on either side. We'll need to create a human chain to get him back up safely. Before we could put this plan into action, a cry from above froze us all in place. And while Tom was being helped back up, one of my female friends called out for help above him, saying she was slipping. It turns out that one part of the path she had been on had been walking, had gave way underneath and sent her tumbling downward. I looked up to see Jenny, who I had thought was beside me, sliding down the rock face, her flashlight spinning away into the darkness as she desperately clawed for purchase. Her feet had gone out from under her, and she was accelerating toward the edge of our precarious ledge. "Jenny!" Sarah screamed, lunging forward. But it was too late. Jenny shot past us, her body skimming over the wet rock like a stone over water. Her outstretched hands missed Marcus's by inches. In the last instant before she disappeared over the edge, our eyes met, and what I saw in hers wasn't just fear, but a terrible recognition. She knew what waited below. The splash when she hit the water was lost in the constant roar of the falls, but we all felt it nonetheless, a moment of finality that changed everything. While this may have been scary in and of itself, what happened next could only be described as something straight from a horror movie. We're all standing there, in shock at what had just happened. When I heard the sound of movement, I looked up, and there, at the top of the ridge, was this figure with long dark hair, watching me. It was terrifying. It was in all black, and had these faint yellow glowing eyes. "We have to go after her," Ethan shouted, already moving toward the edge where Jenny had disappeared. "No." Sarah grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "The pool at the bottom is too dangerous, especially in the dark. We need to call for backup and proper rescue equipment." But even as she spoke, I noticed her eyes weren't on the water below but on the ridge above us. Following her gaze, I saw what had captured her attention. At the top of the ridge, silhouetted against the night sky, stood a figure. The distance and darkness made details difficult to discern, but one thing was unmistakable: the person had long dark hair that seemed to move independently of the breeze, flowing like tendrils of smoke. And though I told myself it must be a trick of the light, I could have sworn their eyes gleamed with a faint yellow glow. "Who is that?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the falls. No one answered. Sarah's face had gone ashen, and Tom, despite his injury, was struggling to his feet, his eyes fixed on the figure above us. "We need to go," he said, his voice tight with what I now recognized as raw fear. "Now." "But Jenny," Ethan began. "Is gone." Tom cut him off. "And we will be too if we don't move." The harshness of his statement shocked me, but before I could respond, the figure on the ridge moved. It wasn't the movement itself that sent ice through my veins, but the manner of it, not the natural motion of a person walking, but a jerky, almost spasmodic shift that reminded me of stop-motion animation. One moment it was standing at the edge, the next it was several feet to the right, with no transitional movement between. "Oh God," Marcus whispered. "It's happening again." "What's happening?" I demanded, but no one seemed to hear me, or if they did, they were too terrified to respond. Sarah's radio crackled to life, making us all jump. Through the static, a voice called out Jenny's voice. "Help me, I'm cold." Sarah fumbled with the radio, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. "Jenny? Jenny, where are you?" Only static answered. "That's impossible," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "She couldn't have survived that fall. And even if she did, there's no way her radio would still work after being submerged." I looked from one face to another, seeking an explanation, but found only the same expression of dread mirrored in each. Whatever was happening, they knew more than they were telling. It was in that moment that I felt my entire body give way, as if I suddenly lost control. The next thing I knew, I too was falling down to the grounds below me. One moment I was standing on solid rock, the next my feet were sliding out from under me. There was no transition, no gradual loss of balance, just sudden, complete failure of my muscles to respond to my commands. I heard Ethan scream my name as I pitched backward, my arms windmilling uselessly. Then I was falling, the world spinning around me in a nauseating blur of darkness and fragmentary flashes of light from the others' flashlights. Something, a protruding rock, perhaps caught me a glancing blow to the side of my head. Pain exploded behind my eyes, and for a moment consciousness threatened to slip away. Through sheer force of will, I fought to stay awake, knowing that unconsciousness now would mean certain death. My fall seemed to last both an eternity and no time at all. I braced for the impact with the water below, but instead felt hands grasping at my clothing, arresting my descent. Everybody rushed over to help save me, and one guy managed to grab hold of my hand while another wrapped his arms around one leg, for whatever little good that did. They tried pulling me back up, but there was no use. "I've got you," Marcus shouted, his powerful grip clamping around my wrist. "Hold on." Sarah appeared at my other side, wrapping her arms around my leg in a desperate attempt to stop my slide. But despite their efforts, I continued to slip inch by inch toward the edge, as if some invisible force were pulling me down. I looked down below and I could see there were people trying to help my friend, though they weren't having much success. I knew then that we were all going to die right here on these rocks if somebody didn't do something fast. Through the disorienting haze of fear and adrenaline, I caught glimpses of the pool below. In the shifting moonlight, I could make out shapes moving in the water, human shapes, though something about their movements struck me as profoundly wrong. They appeared to be helping someone, Jenny, but their motions were uncoordinated, jerky, like puppets with tangled strings. "Pull harder." Ethan's voice cut through my rising panic. He had joined the others, adding his strength to the effort to save me. But it wasn't enough. Whatever force had seized control of my body was stronger than all of them combined. I could feel my fingers slipping through Marcus's grasp, see the desperate determination in Sarah's eyes giving way to the knowledge of defeat. That's when I remembered the park ranger telling us about one of the waterfalls in this area called Lucifer Falls, which for some reason nobody had ever been able to find after climbing down to view it at night. It was said that once you get close enough, you could hear voices, supposedly spirits, whispering your name from below. The story Ethan had read from the brochure on our drive up flooded back to me. Lucifer Falls, the waterfall not marked on any map. Was that where we were? Had we somehow stumbled upon the very place the legends warned about? As if in answer to my unspoken question, I began to hear voices beneath the constant roar of the water. At first I thought it was just the others calling to me, but these voices were coming from below, a cacophony of whispers that somehow cut through the thunderous sound of the falls. And they were saying my name. "Mike, Mike, come to us, Mike." The voices were harmonious yet discordant, speaking in perfect unison but with distinct timbres that suggested many speakers rather than one. They promised rest, peace, an end to struggling. For a moment, just a moment, I felt myself respond to their call, my body relaxing, ready to surrender to gravity and join whatever waited below. Then Ethan's voice, raw with terror and determination, broke through the hypnotic spell of the whispers. "Dad, fight it. Whatever you're hearing, it's not real." His words acted like a splash of cold water, snapping me back to reality. With every ounce of willpower I possessed, I fought against the strange paralysis that had overtaken me. Slowly, agonizingly, I began to regain control of my limbs. "Pull now," I gasped. "I can help." The combined effort of all four of us, Sarah, Marcus, Ethan, and myself, finally began to make headway against the invisible force. Inch by painful inch, I was dragged back from the edge, until at last I collapsed on the relative safety of the ledge, gasping for breath. "We need to go," Sarah said, her voice shaking but resolute. "Right now, before it comes back for any of us." No one questioned who or what it might be. We helped Tom to his feet, forming a protective circle around him as we began the treacherous climb back up the rocks. Every few seconds I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the strange figure with the glowing eyes pursuing us, but the path behind remained empty. As we neared the top, the whispers from below gradually faded, replaced by the normal sounds of the forest at night. By the time we reached the safety of the overlook, I had almost convinced myself that what I'd experienced had been some kind of hallucination brought on by the fall and the blow to my head. Almost, but not quite. Because now, what is most troubling about this story is not so much what happened to me and my co-workers, but what happened with Tom and the female friend as they were being pulled back up to safety. Before either of them can make it out of the water completely, we noticed that their eyes had turned from their normal state into a solid black. It was like this moment that made two co-workers realize that they were struggling with weren't actually Tom or the girl. We reached the ranger station just before midnight, a somber procession moving in tense silence. No one had spoken much during the drive back, each of us lost in our own thoughts or perhaps afraid to voice the questions that hung in the air between us. Sarah immediately went to the radio to call for a search and rescue team for Jenny, though her expression suggested she held little hope. Marcus helped Tom to a chair, where he sat gingerly, his injured ankle propped on another seat. Ethan moved close to me, keeping his voice low. "Dad, what the hell happened out there?" I shook my head, not trusting myself to put into words what I'd experienced. Instead, I approached Sarah as she finished her call. "You owe us an explanation," I said quietly but firmly. "You all knew something about that place, something you didn't tell us." Sarah's shoulders slumped, the weight of command suddenly visible in every line of her body. "You're right," she admitted. "We should have been honest with you from the start, but who would believe us?" "Try me," I said. She glanced at Tom, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Tell them," he said. "They've seen enough that they deserve to know." Sarah took a deep breath. "The falls have always been different. The local Ojibwe considered the area sacred or forbidden, depending on how you translate their stories. When the park was established in 1934, the surveyors reported strange phenomena, equipment malfunctions, inexplicable sounds, team members experiencing disorientation and memory loss. "But that could be explained by natural causes," Ethan interjected. "Magnetic anomalies, underground gases, that sort of thing." "That's what everyone wanted to believe," Sarah agreed. But over the years, the incidents continued. Visitors would go missing, only to reappear days later with no memory of where they'd been. Rangers would report seeing people who couldn't possibly be their hikers in areas that were closed off. Maintenance workers in parts of the park that hadn't been serviced in years. "And the falls themselves?" I prompted. "There are 5 documented waterfalls in the park," Sarah said. "But there have always been rumors of a 6th Lucifer Falls. According to local legend, it only appears at night, and only to certain people." "People it wants," Tom added, his voice hollow. Before I could ask what he meant by that ominous statement, the door to the station burst open. 2 figures stumbled in, soaking wet and clearly exhausted. It was Jenny and another ranger I hadn't met yet, a young woman with short blonde hair plastered to her skull by water. "Jenny," Sarah exclaimed, rushing forward. "How did you—" She stopped short, her expression shifting from relief to horror. I followed her gaze and felt my blood turn to ice. Jenny's eyes, normally a warm brown, were now solid black, no iris, no white, just depthless pools of darkness that reflected nothing. Beside her, the blonde ranger's eyes were the same. "We made it back," Jenny said, her voice unnaturally flat. "The water helped us." "What water?" Marcus asked, slowly backing away. "Jenny, what happened to you down there?" Jenny's head tilted at an odd angle, the movement too fluid, as if her neck contained more vertebrae than it should. "The water showed us the truth," she said. "It wants to show all of you too." I'll never forget hearing one of them scream as he pointed downwards towards whatever our friends had become. The other one, just before Tom and his girlfriend can pull themselves completely up onto the rocks, let go with both hands, jumping back down into the water below to avoid capture. Tom suddenly lurched to his feet, his injured ankle apparently forgotten. "That's not Jenny," he said, his voice thick with terror. "And that's not Kate either." "Tom, what are you talking about?" Sarah demanded, though her hand had moved to the sidearm at her hip. "Their eyes," he whispered. "It's the same as Lucifer Falls. Whatever lives in the water, it takes people, changes them." Jennifer, the thing that had been Jenny, smiled, the expression stretching her face in a way that seemed to defy the normal constraints of human musculature. "We came to bring you back with us," she said. "The water is waiting. It's so peaceful there." She took a step forward, and as she did, I noticed something else wrong with her movement. Her feet didn't seem to bear her weight in the normal way, as if she were being puppeteered from above rather than walking of her own volition. "Stay back," Sarah warned, drawing her weapon. "Whatever you are, you're not Jenny Carter." The thing wearing Jenny's face didn't even acknowledge the gun. "We are becoming something better," it said. "The water showed us. It will show you too." The blonde ranger Kate moved with the same unnatural fluidity as Jenny, circling to the right while Jenny moved left, attempting to flank us. Water dripped from their clothes onto the floor, but it wasn't clear water. It was darker, almost black, with an oily sheen that caught the light in strange ways. Marcus, who had been inching toward the door, suddenly made a break for it. He was fast, but Jenny was faster, impossibly so. One moment she was across the room, the next she was blocking his path, moving with that same jerky, stop-motion quality I'd seen in the figure on the ridge. "The water is calling you, Marcus," she said, reaching for him with hands that seemed longer, fingers more attenuated than they should be. "Don't you hear it?" Marcus screamed, a sound of pure primal terror that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. Rather than submit to Jenny's touch, he turned and threw himself through the window beside the door, glass shattering around him as he disappeared into the night. Kate moved toward Sarah, who fired a warning shot into the ceiling. "Don't come any closer." But Kate didn't stop. Sarah fired again, this time aiming directly at Kate's chest. The bullet struck true. I saw the impact, saw Kate's body jerk with the force of it, but no blood appeared. Instead, a viscous black liquid oozed from the wound, the same oily substance that dripped from their clothes. "What the hell are they?" Ethan gasped beside me. I had no answer for him. All I knew was that we needed to get out, to get as far from these things as possible. I grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him toward the back door of the station. "Run," I shouted to Sarah. "They're not human anymore." Sarah fired once more at Kate, then turned to follow us. Tom was already ahead, limping but moving surprisingly fast on his injured ankle, fueled by adrenaline and fear. We burst through the back door into the cool night air, running blindly into the forest behind the station. Behind us, I could hear the inhuman things that had once been our colleagues pursuing us, their movements creating an uncanny rhythm that didn't match the cadence of normal human footsteps. "The cars," Sarah gasped. "We need to get to the parking lot." But the parking lot was on the other side of the station, and to reach it we would have to circle back toward our pursuers. I made a split-second decision. "No, the maintenance shed. There are ATVs there. We can take the service road out." We changed direction, crashing through the underbrush toward the small metal building where the park's maintenance equipment was stored. Tom reached it first, fumbling with his keys to unlock the padlock. "Hurry," Ethan urged, glancing back the way we had come. I followed his gaze and felt my heart nearly stop. Jenny and Kate were there, at the edge of the trees, watching us with those terrible black eyes, but they weren't pursuing us anymore. Instead, they stood perfectly still, their bodies oriented toward the falls in the distance. The padlock finally gave way, and Tom threw open the shed door. Inside were 2 ATVs, keys thankfully still in the ignitions. "I'll take one with Ethan," I said quickly. "Sarah, you go with Tom." No one argued. Within moments, we had the ATVs started and were speeding down the narrow service road that led away from the park, away from the falls, and away from the things that had once been our colleagues. As we drove, I couldn't help looking back one last time. In the distance, silhouetted against the night sky, I could see multiple figures standing at the edge of the falls. Jenny and Kate had been joined by others, all watching us go with those same blank black eyes. We watched him swim off in the opposite direction, but by this time there was nothing we could do to save him. We never did find out what happened to any of them after that day. I can only assume they were captured and are now being used for some sort of test subjects for whatever their reasons may be. Just looking at my own hands now, I can still see the long dark hair growing in them like I saw that day. That's why warning you all not to venture down this path at night. As a matter of fact, it might be best just to stay away from these woods entirely during nighttime hours, like we should have. We drove for hours, not daring to stop until we were well clear of Gooseberry Falls State Park. The night passed in a blur of fear and confusion, none of us speaking much beyond what was necessary to coordinate our escape. By dawn, we had reached Duluth, where we checked into a motel on the outskirts of town, paying cash and using false names. The room was small and shabby, with 2 double beds and faded wallpaper that might once have been floral. We collapsed onto the beds, exhausted beyond words, but too wired with adrenaline and fear to sleep. "What the hell were those things?" Ethan finally asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between us. Sarah sat on the edge of the other bed, her ranger's hat discarded beside her, her normally neat hair in disarray. "We don't know," she admitted. "Not really. There have been incidents at the falls for as long as the park has existed. People going missing, strange sightings, unexplained phenomena. But nothing like what we saw tonight." "You should have warned us," I said, unable to keep the accusation from my voice. "You knew something was wrong with that place, and you let us walk right into it." "Would you have believed me?" Sarah countered. "If I'd told you that the falls were haunted or possessed or whatever they are, that there's something in the water that can take over people, change them, you'd have thought I was crazy." She had a point, but it did little to ease my anger. "You could have tried." Tom, who had been silent until now, spoke up from where he sat by the window, keeping watch. "It's never been this bad before," he said quietly. "A few disappearances over the years, yes. Strange sounds, lights in the woods, rangers quitting without explanation, but never Never what we saw tonight. Do you think it's spreading? Ethan asked, the question hanging in the air like a physical presence. No one answered immediately. The implications were too terrible to contemplate. We need to report this, I said finally, to someone who can contain it, study it, figure out what's happening. Sarah laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. Report it to who? The state police? The Forest Service? The CDC? What exactly would we tell them? That there's something in the water at Gooseberry Falls that turns people into whatever Jenny and Kate became. We have to try, I insisted. People are going to die if we don't. People have already died, Tom said softly. Jenny, Kate, probably Marcus by now, and who knows how many others over the years. The gravity of his words settled over us like a shroud. We had escaped, yes, but at what cost? And what responsibility did we now bear to prevent others from suffering the same fate? We agreed to rest for a few hours, then make our way to the nearest FBI field office to report what we had witnessed. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all we had. I must have dozed off despite my best intentions, because when I next opened my eyes, the quality of light filtering through the cheap curtains had changed. It was late afternoon, the sun low in the sky. I sat up quickly, disoriented, and looked around the room. Ethan was asleep on the bed beside me, but Tom and Sarah were gone. Ethan, I shook him awake. Where are Tom and Sarah? He blinked sleepily, then sat up with a start as he remembered our situation. They were here when I fell asleep. Maybe they went to get food. But their bags were gone too, I noticed. And on the small table by the door was a note, written in Sarah's neat, precise handwriting. Mike and Ethan, we've gone back. The water is calling us. Don't follow. Get as far away from Minnesota as you can. It's stronger than we thought, and it's spreading. I'm sorry. Sarah. A cold dread settled in my stomach. We have to go, I said, already gathering our meager belongings. Now. Back to the falls? Ethan asked, alarmed. No, I said firmly. Away, as far away as possible. We checked out of the motel and drove south, stopping only for gas and food. By nightfall we had crossed into Iowa, but even that distance didn't feel safe enough. We continued on, pushing through the night until we reached Kansas City, where we finally allowed ourselves to rest. In the days that followed, we tried to make sense of what had happened. We considered reporting it, as we had planned, but each time we rehearsed what we would say, the story sounded more and more unbelievable. Who would take us seriously? And worse, what if our report somehow led others back to the falls, into the same danger we had barely escaped? In the end, we decided to wait, to watch the news for any reports of strange occurrences in northern Minnesota, to gather evidence before approaching the authorities. But the stories never came. Whatever was happening at Gooseberry Falls, it remained contained, at least for now. Or perhaps it was simply biding its time. It's been 6 months since that night at the falls. Ethan and I have settled in Arizona, as far from Minnesota as we could reasonably go. I found work as a security consultant, and Ethan is taking classes at the local community college. We've tried to build a new life, to put the horror behind us. But I know it's not over. How could it be, when I carry a part of it with me? It started about a week after our escape, a strange darkening of the skin on my hands, particularly along the veins. At first I dismissed it as bruising from that night, but it didn't fade. Instead, it spread, thin black lines extending up my forearms like roots seeking soil. And then the hair began to grow, not normal hair, but long dark strands that emerged from my palms, from the tracks of those black veins. I cut it, burned it, even tried to dig it out with a knife in a moment of desperate panic, but it always returns, thicker and longer each time. Just looking at my own hands now, I can still see the long dark hair growing in them like I saw that day. That's why I'm warning you all not to venture down this path at night. As a matter of fact, it might be best just to stay away from these woods entirely during nighttime hours, like we should have. Sometimes at night I hear the whispers again, the voices from the water calling me back. They're fainter now, with distance, but they're there. And sometimes I find myself unconsciously turning north, as if some internal compass is trying to guide me back to the falls. Ethan watches me constantly, fear behind his eyes. He's seen the changes in me, though we don't speak of them. I've caught him researching waterborne parasites, obscure fungal infections, rare genetic disorders, anything that might explain what's happening to me in rational, scientific terms. But we both know the truth. though we dare not voice it. Whatever lives in the waters of Lucifer Falls has claimed me, marked me. It's only a matter of time before the transformation is complete. I write this account now, while I still can, while I'm still myself enough to warn others. Stay away from Gooseberry Falls State Park. Stay away from the water. And if you ever find yourself near a waterfall at night and hear voices calling your name from below, run. Run as far and as fast as you can. Whatever it is that inhabits these lands does not seem too keen on having people wandering around here at night. But if you are, be careful, for you may soon find the woods themselves can't tell the difference between friend and foe, because that's the final truth I've come to understand. The entity in the falls doesn't just take over bodies, it blurs the boundaries between them. Between self and other, between human and environment. The black-eyed things that were once Jenny and Kate weren't just possessed humans. They were extensions of the falls themselves, water given form and purpose. And now, as I feel the changes advancing through my body day by day, I understand that I am becoming part of it too. A tendril of its consciousness, reaching far from its source, but still connected, still obedient to its will. I've made arrangements for Ethan's care after I'm gone. Money, identification papers, everything he'll need to disappear and start over somewhere new. Somewhere far from water, if such a place exists in this world. As for me, I know where I'm going, though I fight against it with every remaining ounce of my humanity. North, to the falls, to the water. To join with whatever ancient presence dwells there, has perhaps always dwelled there, predating humanity itself. In my more lucid moments, I wonder about its purpose. Is it malevolent or simply different, operating on a timescale and with motivations beyond our comprehension? Does it seek to destroy humanity or transform it into something new? And are those who have gone before me, Tom, Sarah, Jenny, and countless others over the centuries, still somehow present within it, their consciousness preserved in some unimaginable form? I suppose I'll know soon enough. If you're reading this, then my final act of resistance was successful. I've entrusted this account to Ethan, with instructions to share it only if the phenomenon at the falls begins to spread beyond its boundaries. If the black water starts appearing in other places, if the whispers begin calling to those who have never set foot in Minnesota, heed my warning. Stay away from the falls. Stay away from the water. And if you see someone with black eyes and long dark hair watching you from a distance, run, and don't look back. For you may soon find the woods themselves can't tell the difference between friend and foe. And neither, anymore, can I. The first thing I noticed when I arrived at Cherokee National Forest was the silence. Not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping woodland, but something deeper, more absolute, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. As the newly appointed senior park ranger of the Eastern District, I expected the usual cacophony of nature, birds calling, insects buzzing, leaves rustling. Instead, there was only the occasional whisper of wind through the towering pines, almost like hushed voices exchanging secrets I wasn't meant to hear. My name is Kanadia Dohi Wahali, which means Hunter of the Woods Eagle in Cherokee, though most of my colleagues at the Forest Service simply call me Kane. At 35, I'm relatively young for my position, but my family's connection to these mountains stretches back countless generations. My grandfather was a tribal elder who taught me the old ways of the Salagite, proper name for the Cherokee people, and instilled in me a deep reverence for these ancient forests that had sheltered our people long before Europeans arrived. On this continent, the forest remembers. My grandfather used to tell me, his weathered face solemn in the firelight of our family gatherings. It remembers every footstep, every word spoken beneath its branches. It remembers the blood spilled on its soil and the tears shed by our ancestors on the Trail of Tears. Never forget that you walk among memories, Kanati. I hadn't thought much about his words until now, as I stood on the wooden porch of the ranger station, watching the late afternoon sunlight filter through the trees. The station was rustic but functional, a 2-story log cabin, with a small attached garage for the service vehicle, a radio room and quarters upstairs where I would live during my posting. It was isolated, the nearest town of Salagi Creek being 20 miles away down winding mountain roads. The transfer to this district hadn't been entirely my choice. After the incident at Smoky Mountains National Park where I'd nearly died trying to rescue hikers during a flash flood, me, Superiors thought a quieter posting might be good for me. Administrative leave disguised as a promotion, my former colleague had joked. But I didn't mind. Something about returning to the forests where my ancestors had once lived felt right, like completing a circle. I unpacked my few belongings, my mind drifting to the regional orientation briefing I'd received. The Eastern District of Cherokee National Forest had seen an unusual number of missing persons reports over the past 2 years, mostly hikers who had strayed from marked trails. Most had been found, disoriented but unharmed, with strange stories of feeling followed or hearing unusual sounds. A few had never been located at all. Probably just got lost and wandered into one of the hollers, my supervisor had said with a dismissive wave. These mountains can confuse even experienced hikers, and the locals don't always report when they find and help someone. But something in his eyes told me he wasn't entirely convinced by his own explanation. When I pressed him, he just shrugged. The locals have their stories, superstitions passed down from the old days. Nothing a man of science like yourself needs to worry about. As darkness began to fall, I fired up the old wood stove and made myself a simple dinner, listening to the radio crackle with routine check-ins from other rangers across the forest. The isolation suddenly felt more pronounced, with only the glow of the stove and the small circle of light from my lantern pushing back against the darkness. The radio suddenly came to life with static, making me jump despite myself. Eastern Station, this is dispatch. Do you copy? Over. I picked up the handset. This is Eastern Station. Ranger Wohali. I copy. Over. We've got a situation, Ranger. Family of 4 reported overdue from a day hike on the Sweetwater Trail. Parents, teenage son, and 9-year-old daughter. Their vehicle is still at the trailhead parking. Last contact was a text message to a relative around 1,400 hours saying they were heading back. Over. I glanced at my watch. Nearly 2,100 hours now. 7 hours overdue was concerning, especially with nightfall and the forecasted temperature drop. Understood. I'll gear up and head to the trailhead. Has a preliminary search been initiated? Over. Negative. You're the closest ranger. Backup from Central District is at least 2 hours out. Over. Copy that. I'll establish a search pattern and report findings. Over and out. I quickly changed into my field uniform, packed my search and rescue gear, and strapped on my sidearm standard issue for predator defense. As I headed for the door, I paused at a small wooden box on the mantel. It had been a gift from my grandfather before he passed. Inside was a small leather pouch containing sacred tobacco, a flint striker, and a carved wooden amulet in the shape of an Eagly traditional Salagi guardian charm. On impulse, I slipped the amulet into my pocket. The rational part of my mind dismissed it as mere superstition, but some deeper instinct, the part of me that was still connected to the old ways, knew better. In these ancient mountains, it was always better to err on the side of respect for traditions. Outside, the night had fully descended, and the forest seemed to press closer around the small clearing where the station stood. The trees had become dark sentinels, their branches reaching toward a sky scattered with stars. As I climbed into the Forest Service truck and started the engine, the headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the narrow gravel road that led deeper into the woods. The Sweetwater trailhead was about 12 miles from the station, along winding forest roads that snaked through valleys and up ridgelines. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched from the darkness beyond my headlights. Twice I found myself slowing down, peering into the forest alongside the road, seeing nothing but still feeling that insistent prickle at the back of my neck, the primitive instinct that evolved to warn us when we're being hunted. When I reached the trailhead parking area, I found a single vehicle, a blue Honda SUV with Tennessee plates that matched the description of the missing family's car. I pulled up beside it and got out, my flashlight beam playing across the empty parking area and the trailhead sign that marked the beginning of the Sweetwater Trail. The night was unnaturally quiet. No owls called, no insects chirped. Even the usual rustle of nocturnal animals moving through the underbrush was absent. The silence was absolute, oppressive, as if the forest itself was listening. I returned to my truck and retrieved my pack and rifle ladder, a precaution against the black bears that roamed these mountains. Standard procedure for a night search called for at least 2 rangers, but with backup hours away and temperatures dropping, I couldn't wait. The 9-year-old girl especially would be vulnerable to hypothermia. "This is Ranger Woholly at Sweetwater Trailhead," I reported into my radio. "Confirmed missing party's vehicle on site. Initiating search along the trail. Over." "Copy that, Ranger. Be advised, Weather Service has updated forecast. Fog expected to roll in after midnight. Over." "Understood. I'll try to locate them quickly. Over and out." I clipped the radio to my belt, adjusted my headlamp, and started down the trail, calling out periodically. "Hello, Forest Service, call out if you can hear me." My voice seemed swallowed by the darkness, the dense trees absorbing the sound. The trail itself was well maintained but narrow, winding its way up the mountain through stands of ancient oak and pine. My flashlight beam caught the occasional reflective trail marker, confirming I was still on the right path. About a mile in, I came across the first sign that something was wrong. A single hiking boot-adult-sized men's sleigh in the middle of the trail. It wasn't weathered or damaged, just abandoned, as if its owner had simply stepped out of it and continued on. I knelt to examine it, noting it was a high-end hiking boot, relatively new. The laces were still tied. "That doesn't make sense," I muttered to myself. No one accidentally steps out of a securely laced boot, and no hiker would willingly abandon expensive gear. I photographed the boot where it lay, then bagged it as evidence and continued up the trail, my sense of unease growing with each step. The silence of the forest seemed to deepen, if that were possible, pressing against my ears like a physical weight. Another half-mile along, the trail opened into a small Claringa natural rest stop for hikers with a fallen log serving as a bench. My flashlight beam caught something reflective on the ground near the log. A smartphone in a bright red case. I picked it up. The screen was intact, not cracked, but the battery was dead. Another odd finding: most hikers, especially those with children, were careful with their phones, keeping them charged and secure. As I pocketed the phone, my headlamp illuminated something at the edge of the clearing that made my blood run cold. A line of footprints led away from the trail, into the untamed forest beyond. But these weren't normal human footprints. They were massive, at least 16 inches long and 8 inches wide, with 5 distinct toe impressions. They were too large to belong to any human and the wrong shape for a bear. I'd spent my entire career in these mountains, tracked every animal that lived in these forests, and I had never seen prints like these. They reminded me of the stories my grandfather used to tell around the fire stories of Nunyunui, the stone giant who stalked the remote valleys of the Smoky Mountains, or Kekle Kudle, the fearsome cliff dweller. As a modern park ranger with scientific training, I'd always considered those stories to be cultural metaphors, ways for the Cherokee to explain natural phenomena or warn children away from dangerous areas. But staring at those enormous footprints, illuminated in the harsh glare of my headlamp, a primal fear gripped me, the ancient terror of the unknown predator. The footprints continued into the dense forest, away from the trail, and beside them were smaller prints human-sized, showing that the family had left the trail and followed whatever had made those massive tracks. But why would they do that? What could possibly compel an experienced hiking family to abandon a marked trail and follow something into the wilderness as night approached? I stood at the edge of the clearing, torn between following proper search protocols, staying on the trail, waiting for backup, and following those tracks into the uncharted forest. The massive prints seemed to mock me, a challenge from something that shouldn't exist. I thought of the 9-year-old girl, somewhere in the dark woods with whatever creature had left those prints. The decision made itself. Unholstering my sidearm and keeping my flashlight steady, I stepped off the trail and into the wilderness, following the intermingled tracks of the unknown creature and the missing family. The trees seemed to close in behind me, and for the first time in my career as a park ranger, I felt like an intruder in the forest I had sworn to protect. Something ancient and powerful had awakened in these mountains, and somehow I knew it had been waiting for me. The deeper I ventured into the forest, the more the rational part of my mind, the part shaped by years of scientific training and modern education, struggled to explain what I was tracking. The massive footprints continued in a straight line, purposeful and deliberate, while the human prints alongside them showed no signs of struggle or flight. The family appeared to be following the creature willingly, which contradicted everything I knew about human behavior and potential predator encounters. The terrain grew steadily more difficult as I moved away from established trails. The mountainside became steeper, the underbrush thicker, and ancient rhododendron thickets formed nearly impenetrable barriers that I had to navigate around. My progress slowed, and I checked my watch. Almost midnight. and still no sign of the missing family beyond their tracks. "This is Ranger Wohali," I spoke into my radio, voice hushed despite the apparent solitude. "I've located tracks of the missing party leading off-trail approximately 1.5 miles from the Sweetwater trailhead. They appear to be following something else. Continuing pursuit." "Over." The radio crackled with static before the dispatcher's voice came through, broken and faint. "Copy, Wohali. Backup en route, ETA. Hours. Should wait." "Negative," I responded. "Concerns about child safety and dropping temperatures. We'll continue search. Please send backup to follow my GPS tracker. Over and out." I clipped the radio back to my belt, unsure if my full message had gotten through. The mountains often created dead zones for radio transmission, and I was moving deeper into uncharted territory. As I followed the tracks, I noticed that the forest was changing subtly around me. The trees here were older, massive trunks that must have stood for centuries. Thick carpets of moss-covered rocks and fallen logs, and delicate ferns unfurled in the understory. It was beautiful, primeval and utterly silent. No wind rustled the canopy above. No animals moved in the darkness. Even the sound of my own breathing seemed muted, as if the forest was absorbing all sound. The tracks led me to the base of a sheer rock face, at least 40 feet high, where a narrow crevice split the stone. The footprints, both human and the massive unknown, wound directly into this dark fissure. I paused, shining my flashlight into the opening. The beam revealed a passage just wide enough for a person to walk through sideways, disappearing into darkness. My instincts screamed warnings. Cave systems in these mountains could be extensive and dangerous, easy places to become lost or trapped. Standard procedure would be to mark the location and wait for the cave rescue team, but the thought of that 9-year-old girl, potentially injured or hypothermic, pushed me forward. I marked the entrance with surveyor's tape, recorded the GPS coordinates, and radioed my position to dispatch, though I received only static in return. Then, drawing my sidearm again, I turned sideways and began to edge through the narrow passage. The rock walls pressed close on either side, cool and damp against my shoulders. The air grew noticeably colder, carrying a musty, mineral scent. After about 30 feet of claustrophobic squeezing, the passage widened suddenly into a large cavern. I played my flashlight around the space, revealing a cathedral-like chamber with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. Ancient stalactites hung down like stone teeth, and water dripped somewhere in the distance with a rhythmic plopping sound that echoed through the chamber. The floor was surprisingly level, covered in fine silt that clearly showed both the huge, inhuman footprints and the smaller human ones continuing across the cavern toward another opening on the far side. But what drew my attention immediately was a pile in the center of the cavern discarded belongings from the missing family. Backpacks, a camera, hiking poles, water bottles, even one person's shirt and pants, as if they had partially undressed. I approached cautiously, keeping my sidearm ready, and examined the items. Nothing was damaged or torn. There were no signs of a struggle or violence. It was as if the family had simply decided to abandon their possessions before continuing on. I checked one of the backpacks and found a wallet with ID confirming it belonged to Michael Turner, the father of the missing family. "What the hell happened here?" I whispered, my voice echoing slightly in the cavern. As if in answer, a low, resonant sound vibrated through the chamber, not quite a growl, not quite a hum, but something in between that I felt in my chest more than heard with my ears. It came from the passage on the far side of the cavern. I froze, listening intently. The sound came again, slightly louder, and now I could discern a pattern to it almost like speech, but in no language I'd ever heard. It rose and fell in tone, creating an unsettling melody that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Instinctively, I reached into my pocket and clutched the wooden eagle amulet my grandfather had given me. Its familiar contours were reassuring against my palm. I remembered his teachings about cave systems in these mountain show. The Cherokee believed they connected to the darkening land, the underworld where the spirits of the dead journeyed. Caves were sacred places, boundaries between worlds, where the normal rules might not apply. Foolish superstition, I muttered to myself, trying to steady my nerves, focus on the facts. The facts were these. A family was missing, their belongings abandoned in a cave that wasn't on any Forest Service map I knew of, and something large enough to leave 16-inch footprints was somewhere ahead of me, making sounds no known animal should make. I had two choices: retreat and wait for backup, possibly sacrificing the family's lives if they were injured, or continue forward into unknown danger. It wasn't really a choice at all. Gripping my flashlight in my left hand and my sidearm in my right, I started across the cavern toward the far passage, moving as quietly as possible on the silty floor. The strange vocalization had stopped, but I could feel a subtle vibration through the soles of my boots, as if something massive was moving ahead of me. The far passage was larger than the entrance, allowing me to walk upright, though I had to duck occasionally to avoid low-hanging stalactites. The air grew warmer as I progressed, which was the opposite of what I expected deeper in a cave system. The walls themselves seemed different too, smoother, almost polished in places, with strange markings that my flashlight beam revealed at intervals. I paused to examine one such marking, a series of symbols carved into the stone and filled with some red substance that might have been ochre or hematite. They resembled Cherokee syllabary, but distorted somehow, the familiar characters twisted into unfamiliar configurations. I recognized elements of the symbols for fire, mountain, and spirit, but they were combined in ways I'd never seen before. As I stared at the markings, trying to make sense of them, a child's voice echoed from somewhere ahead. "Mommy, I'm scared. I want to go home." I straightened immediately, heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out. "This is Park Ranger Wohali. I'm here to help you." Silence answered me, then a faint whimper that might have been the girl again, too distant to make out words. I rushed forward, flashlight beam bouncing wildly across the passage walls as I half ran, half stumbled toward the sound. The passage began to slope downward, making the footing treacherous. I slowed, forcing myself to be careful despite my urgency. A broken ankle down here would help no one. The passage eventually opened into another chamber, smaller than the first but still impressive. What made me stop short, however, was that this chamber was dimly illuminated by some natural light source, a soft, greenish phosphorescence that seemed to emanate from lichen or fungi growing on the walls. In this eerie light, I could make out crude stone structures, not natural formations, but deliberately placed in stacked rocks forming low walls and what looked like the foundations of primitive dwellings. It resembled an ancient settlement, long abandoned and half reclaimed by the cave. And there, huddled against one of the stone walls, was a small figure in a pink jacket, the missing 9-year-old girl. "Hello?" I called softly, holstering my weapon to appear less threatening. "My name is Kane. I'm a park ranger. I'm here to help you and your family." The girl looked up, her face pale in the greenish light, tear tracks visible on her dirty cheeks. She didn't respond or move toward me, just stared with wide, frightened eyes. I approached slowly, hands visible. "It's okay. You're safe now. Where's the rest of your family?" Still, she didn't speak, just raised a trembling hand and pointed toward a dark opening at the far side of the chamber. "They went that way? With something else?" A small nod. I crouched down to her level, maintaining a non-threatening distance. "Can you tell me your name?" "Lily," she whispered, so faintly I barely heard it. "Lily, that's a pretty name. Can you tell me what happened? Why did you all leave the trail?" Her eyes darted nervously to the passage she had pointed to, then back to me. "The shiny man told us to follow him. Mommy and Daddy and Jake said we had to, but I got scared and hid." "The shiny man," I repeated, a chill running through me despite the warmth of the chamber. "What did he look like?" "Tall. Really, really tall. And his skin. It wasn't skin. It was like furry, but shiny too in the dark." She hugged her knees tighter. "He talked funny. Not like talking. Like in our heads." My mind raced through possibilities. Hallucinations from toxic cave gases? A shared delusion brought on by fear and disorientation? Or something else entirely, something that stirred memories of my grandfather's warnings about entities that dwelled in the deepest parts of the mountains. "How long ago did they go?" I asked, pushing aside my speculations to focus on the immediate rescue. "I don't know. A long time. The shiny man comes back sometimes to check on me. He leaves me berries." She pointed to a small pile of dark fruits beside her that I hadn't noticed before. "He said I have to stay until I'm ready." "Ready for what?" She shook her head. "I don't know. But I don't want to be ready. I want to go home." "That's exactly where I'm going to take you," I said firmly, reaching out my hand. "Come on, Lily. Let's get you out of here, and then I'll find your family." She hesitated, looking at my outstretched hand, then at the dark passage. "But what about Mommy and Daddy and Jake?" "I promise I'll find them," I assured her. "But my first job is to get you to safety." After a moment's hesitation, she took my hand, her small fingers cold despite the warmth of the chamber. I helped her to her feet, noticing how she wobbled slightly from stiffness or exhaustion. "Can you walk okay?" She nodded, but I could see she was weakened. I considered carrying her, but decided to save my strength in case we needed to move quickly. "We're going to go back the way I came in," I explained. "It's not too far. Just stay close to me." As we turned toward the passage I'd entered through, a deep, resonant sound echoed through the chamber, same vocalizing I'd heard earlier, but louder now, with a distinctly agitated quality. It was coming from the passage Lily had indicated her family had taken. Lily's grip on my hand tightened painfully. "He's coming back," she whispered, terror evident in her voice. I drew my sidearm again, positioning myself between Lily and the dark passage. "Stay behind me," I instructed her quietly. The strange vocalization grew louder, and now I could feel vibrations through the stone floor beneath my boots. Whatever was coming was large and moving quickly. I aimed my flashlight at the passage entrance, sidearm ready, trying to control my breathing and steady my racing heart. The beam illuminated nothing but darkness at first, then caught movement, a massive shape emerging from the shadows. What stepped into the dim phosphorescent light of the chamber defied rational explanation. It was tall, at least 8 feet, and powerfully built, with broad shoulders and a barrel chest, but it was the creature's appearance that sent a shock of primal terror through me. Its body was covered in thick, dark fur that seemed to absorb and reflect the greenish light simultaneously, creating an unnatural shimmering effect. Its face was almost human in structure but elongated, with a prominent brow ridge and a wide mouth. The eyes were entirely inhuman, large, round, and reflective, like polished obsidian. I recognized it instantly from my grandfather's stories. Tsul Kalu, the slant-eyed giant of Cherokee, legend what modern cryptozoologists would call Bigfoot or Sasquatch. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, we stared at each other, the creature and I, across the ancient chamber. Then its gaze shifted to Lily, cowering behind me, and something like recognition flickered in those inhuman eyes. It opened its mouth and emitted another of those resonant vocalizations, but this time, strangely, words formed in my mind as if carried by the sound waves themselves. "She is not ready. The others have begun the journey. She must wait." I felt dizzy, disoriented. Was I hallucinating? Had cave gases affected my mind, or was this creature somehow projecting thoughts directly into my consciousness? I tightened my grip on my sidearm but didn't raise it. Somehow, I knew that would be a fatal mistake. Instead, I spoke aloud, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'm taking her out of here. Her family too, if they're still alive. This is U.S. Forest Service land, and these people are under my protection." The creature tilted its head, regarding me with those unsettling eyes. Another vocalization, another set of thoughts forming in my mind. "You are Salagi. You know the old ways. You wear the eagle guardian. You should understand." The wooden amulet seemed to pulse warmly in my pocket. I resisted the urge to reach for it, keeping my hands where they were. "I understand that a child needs to be returned to safety," I replied. "Whatever you're doing, whatever journey you're talking about, she hasn't consented to it. Let us leave and tell me where to find her family." The creature took a step forward, its massive frame blocking much of the passage behind it. I instinctively stepped back, keeping Lily shielded behind me. The world is changing. The old boundaries weaken. We prepare for what comes. The family was called. They answered. Only the small one resisted. "Called by what?" I demanded, frustration overcoming some of my fear. "What's coming that you're preparing for?" Instead of answering, the creature suddenly tensed, its head turning sharply toward the passage I had entered through. It sniffed the air, nostrils flaring. "Others come. Metal carriers, danger bringers." Relief washed through me. The backup team must be getting close, tracking my GPS signal. The creature looked back at me, its massive shoulders hunching slightly. "Take the small one. She is not ready. But Utsalagi Guardian, you will return. The forest will call you." Before I could respond, the creature turned with surprising agility and disappeared back into the dark passage, moving faster than something so large should be able to. The sound of its retreat faded quickly, leaving Lily and me alone in the eerie green light of the ancient chamber. Lily's small voice broke the silence. Is the shiny man gone? I holstered my weapon with a shaking hand. Yes, for now. Come on, we need to move quickly. I led her toward the exit passage, my mind reeling with what I'd just experienced. Had I really communicated with a creature that shouldn't exist? Or was I experiencing some kind of shared delusion with this frightened child? As we made our way through the passage and back to the larger cavern with the abandoned belongings, I tried to focus on the immediate task: getting Lily to safety. Questions about what I'd seen and what had happened to her family would have to wait. We had almost reached the narrow entrance crevice when I heard voices and saw flashlight beams penetrating the darkness. The backup team had arrived. I called out to them, relief flooding through me at the sound of human voices responding. As Forest Service personnel helped us through the narrow passage and back into the open air of the forest, I found myself unable to look away from the dark mountain rising above us. Somewhere in its depths, something ancient and powerful was stirring, something connected to my heritage in ways I didn't yet understand. And somehow, I knew with bone-deep certainty that this encounter was only the beginning. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of debriefings, search planning, and bureaucratic procedures. After Lily Turner was safely transported to Salagi Creek Regional Hospital, where doctors found her dehydrated but otherwise unharmed, I spent hours recounting my search and rescue efforts to Forest Service officials, local law enforcement, and even FBI agents called in due to the disappearance of the rest of the Turner family. I told them everything, except what I had really seen in that cave. In my official report, I described finding Lily alone and disoriented, having become separated from her family, who had inexplicably wandered off trail. I mentioned unusual large animal tracks but attributed them to a possible bear, despite knowing no bear could leave prints like those I'd followed. I said nothing about the massive fur-covered creature that had communicated directly into my mind, nothing about its cryptic warnings of boundaries weakening or preparations for something coming. Who would believe me? Best case, I'd be removed from duty pending psychological evaluation. Worst case, I'd become the laughingstock of the Forest Service and destroy any credibility I might need later. Because I knew with inexplicable certainty that this wasn't over. After the initial search for the remaining Turner family members yielded nothing, the search teams couldn't even locate the cave entrance I'd marked. Somehow missing it despite the GPS coordinates I'd provided, I was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Standard procedure, they assured me, given the unusual circumstances and the continuing mystery of 3 missing persons. I retreated to my cabin at the ranger station, exhausted both physically and mentally. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by dreams of massive shadowy figures moving through ancient forests and strange symbols carved into stone that seemed to shift and change as I tried to read them. On the 3rd morning after the incident, I awoke to the sound of someone knocking at my door. Bleary-eyed and still half asleep, I opened it to find an elderly man standing on my porch, leaning on a gnarled wooden walking stick. He was clearly Cherokee, with copper skin deeply lined by age and weather, long silver hair pulled back in a traditional style, and penetrating dark eyes that seemed to look through me rather than at me. "Sio Kanadia Dohi Wohali," he greeted me in Cherokee. "I am Joseph Walkingstick. I believe we need to talk." I recognized the name immediately. Joseph Walkingstick was a respected elder in the eastern band of Cherokee Indians, known for his knowledge of traditional medicine and stories. My grandfather had mentioned him often, though I'd never met him personally. "Sio," I responded, somewhat stunned. "How did you know where to find me? And why are you here?" A faint smile creased his weathered face. "The old ones told me, and as for why," his expression grew serious. "You have seen Sul Kalu, have you not? The slant-eyed giant who guards the sacred places." I glanced around nervously, suddenly aware that we might be overheard. Perhaps we should talk inside. Once seated at my small kitchen table, mugs of strong coffee between us, I found myself telling Joseph everything: the tracks, the cave, the ancient chamber with its stone structures, and most importantly, the creature itself and the strange communication we had shared. He listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as if I was merely confirming what he already knew. When I finished, he sat in silence for a moment, his gnarled hands wrapped around his coffee mug. Finally, he spoke. "The stories are true, then. The guardians are stirring." "Guardians?" I asked. "The creature called itself something like that. It knew I was Cherokee. It mentioned the eagle amulet in my pocket, though I never showed it. Joseph nodded. In the old days, before the white man came, our people understood that we shared these mountains with many being some visible, some not. The most powerful were the guardians, ancient spirits who protected the boundaries between worlds. Tzul'kalu was one of these, though our people knew him by many names. What do you mean by boundaries between worlds? I asked. The physical world, what you see and touch, is only one layer of reality, Joseph explained, his voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of a traditional storyteller. Our ancestors knew of others, the upper world of the celestial beings, the underworld of the departed, and the middle world where humans dwelled. These worlds were separated by boundaries that kept each in its proper place and maintained the balance of all things. He took a sip of his coffee, regarding me over the rim of his mug. But these boundaries were not fixed forever. They could weaken, especially in certain places, caves, mountain peaks, deep forest sand at certain times. When this happened, beings from one world could cross into another. And the guardians protected these boundaries? I asked, trying to make sense of his explanation. Yes, but they did more than that. They prepared for the times of great change, when the boundaries would shift significantly, what our people called the Great Renewal, his dark eyes fixed on mine. I believe such a time is approaching, Kanati. The signs have been appearing for years: unusual animal behavior, spirits appearing where they haven't been seen in generations, dreams and visions coming to our medicine people. I sat back, processing his words. Part of me, the modern, educated ranger, wanted to dismiss this as superstition and folklore. But another part, the part that had stood face to face with a creature that shouldn't exist, knew better. The Turner family, I said slowly. The creature said they were called and that they had begun the journey. What did it mean? Joseph's expression grew grave. Some humans are sensitive to the calls of the other worlds. In the old stories, people would sometimes be drawn to follow the Nunahide immortals into their realm. They would disappear from our world, transformed to serve some purpose in the other world. Are you saying they were abducted? I asked, the word feeling inadequate for what Joseph was describing. Not as you understand it. The call cannot force, only invite. Those who follow do so by choice, though they may not fully understand what they are choosing. He leaned forward. The girl, Lily, she said her family went willingly, but she resisted and hid. This suggests she was strong enough to resist the call that her family could not. But why? I pressed. Why would these guardians be calling humans now? Preparation, Joseph said simply. When the great renewal comes, when the boundaries shift, both worlds must be ready. Those who cross over early help prepare the way. He paused, studying my face. The creature recognized you, yes? It knew you were Salagi, knew about your amulet? I nodded. Then you too have been marked in some way. Perhaps by your bloodline. You said your grandfather was an elder who taught you the old ways. Yes, but I never took it that seriously, I admitted. They were just stories to me, cultural heritage, to respect but not literal truth. Joseph smiled faintly. And yet here we are, discussing your conversation with Tzul'kalu as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He had me there. After a moment of silence, I asked, what happens now? Do we try to rescue the Turner family? They may not want rescuing, Joseph said carefully, and finding them will not be easy. The paths to the other world are hidden to most eyes, visible only to those who are called or guided. The cave entrance, I realized. The search teams couldn't find it, even with GPS coordinates. Exactly. The ways between worlds appear and disappear according to their own rules. He fixed me with an intent gaze. But you found it once. You might be able to find it again. Because I'm marked? I asked skeptically. Because you are Salagi, of the old bloodlines, and you carry a guardian spirit, he said, nodding toward my pocket where the eagle amulet rested. And because Tzul'kalu himself told you that you would return. I remembered the creature's parting words. You will return. The forest will call you. A chill ran through me despite the warm morning. So what am I supposed to do? Just wander the forest hoping to find a magical cave entrance again. And then what? Confront this guardian creature and demand it return the Turners? No, Joseph said, his tone suddenly sharp. That would be foolish and dangerous. The guardians are not malevolent, but they are powerful and bound to their purpose. They cannot be commanded by humans, even those of the old bloodlines. He reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew a small object wrapped in deerskin. Carefully unfolding it, he revealed a stone pendant black with flecks of red, polished to a high sheen and carved with symbols similar to those I'd seen in the cave. "This is a speaking stone," he explained. "In the old days, medicine people used such stones to communicate with the spirit world. It may help you understand what the guardians are saying and allow them to understand you more clearly." He held it out to me. After a moment's hesitation, I took it, feeling an unexpected warmth radiating from the stone despite its cool appearance. "There is more at stake here than one family," Joseph continued gravely. "If the boundaries are truly weakening, if the great renewal is approaching, there may be dangers as well as wonders crossing between worlds. Not all spirits are benevolent, Kanati. Some were imprisoned in the underworld for good reason." "So I'm supposed to be what, some kind of spiritual border patrol?" I asked, unable to keep the edge of disbelief from my voice. Joseph smiled, but his eyes remained serious. "You are a guardian in your own way, are you not? A protector of the forest and those who visit it. Perhaps that is why you have been chosen for this." Before I could respond, my phone rang the Forest Service emergency line. I excused myself and answered it. "Ranger Wohali, this is dispatch. We have another missing persons report. A solo hiker, last seen heading toward Whitewater Falls 2 days ago. His car was found at the trailhead this morning." "I'm on administrative leave," I reminded them. "Yes, sir, but Regional Commander Phillips specifically requested you for this. He said, and I quote, 'Wohali knows those trails better than anyone, and we need all hands for this one.'" I glanced at Joseph, who was watching me intently. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I told dispatch, then ended the call. "Another disappearance," Joseph said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Whitewater Falls area, about 15 miles from where I found Lily Turner." I slipped the speaking stone into my pocket alongside my grandfather's amulet. "I need to go." Joseph nodded and rose slowly, leaning on his walking stick. "The forest is calling you already, it seems. Remember, Kanati, respect the old ways, but be cautious. The guardians have their own purpose, which may not align with human concerns." I walked him to the door, my mind already shifting to the new search operation. As he stepped onto the porch, he turned to face me one last time. "One more thing," he said. "The boundaries weaken most at certain times: dawn, dusk, and midnight. And at certain places where water meets stone, where caves open into the earth, where very old trees still stand. Keep this in mind as you search." With those cryptic words, he made his way down the steps and to an old pickup truck parked nearby. I watched him drive away, the dust from the gravel road lingering in the morning air. 20 minutes later, I was in my Forest Service truck heading toward Whitewater Falls, my mind churning with everything Joseph had told me. I tried to focus on the practical aspects of the upcoming search, reviewing mental maps of the terrain and considering the most likely routes the missing hiker might have taken. But underneath these professional considerations ran a current of unease. The coincidence was too perfect, another disappearance so soon after the Turner family, in the same general region of the forest. And me being specifically requested, despite being on administrative leave. "The forest will call you." The road wound through the mountains, climbing steadily toward higher elevations where Whitewater Falls cascaded nearly 400 feet down a series of dramatic rock faces. The forest pressed close on either side of the narrow road, ancient trees forming a canopy that dappled the pavement with shifting patterns of light and shadow. As I rounded a bend, something large moved across the road ahead, just a flash of dark movement, there and gone in an instant. I braked hard, the truck skidding slightly on the gravel shoulder. Heart pounding, I peered through the windshield at the empty road ahead. Whatever I'd seen was gone, vanished into the thick forest. But I knew what it had been, or rather, who. The forest was calling, and the guardians were watching. The search for the missing Hikera 32-year-old software engineer named David Chen, who had recently moved to Asheville, began routinely enough. A command post was established at the Whitewater Falls parking area. Teams were assigned search quadrants, and I was paired with a young ranger named Martinez, who had transferred from Olympic National Park just 2 months earlier. "Heard about your rescue of that little girl," Martinez said as we checked our gear before heading out. "Pretty incredible that you found her in a cave system that wasn't even on our maps." I nodded noncommittally, focusing on adjusting my pack straps rather than meeting his curious gaze. "We got lucky. The girl was resilient." "And the rest of the family?" Any leads? Not that I've heard, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I've been on administrative leave until today. Martinez seemed to sense my reluctance to discuss the matter and changed the subject. So what's our search pattern looking like? Standard grid? I pulled out my Forest Service tablet and showed him the map I'd been studying. We're taking the eastern ridgeline, following the trail to the upper observation platform, then continuing along this less-traveled path that follows the ridge above the falls. Any particular reason for that route? Martinez asked. The hiker's car was found here, so wouldn't he most likely have taken the main trail to the lower viewing area? Where water meets stone, Joseph Walkingstick's words echoed in my mind. Where caves open into the earth, where very old trees still stand. Most of the other teams are covering the main trails, I explained, and Chen's social media showed he was interested in photography, particularly landscape shots from unusual angles. The upper ridge offers some unique perspectives of the falls that you can't get from the regular viewing platforms. Martinez nodded, satisfied with my reasoning, and we set out. The day was clear but cool, typical for early autumn in the higher elevations of the Appalachians. The forest was ablaze with color, the red of maples, the gold of hickories, the russet of oaks, but I found myself unable to appreciate the beauty fully, my senses instead hyper-alert for any sign of the unusual. We reached the upper observation platform without incident, seeing only a few other hikers who had ventured this far up the trail. After checking in with the command post via radio, we continued along the less-traveled path I had identified, which wound along the ridgeline above the massive cascade of Whitewater Falls. The thunder of the falling water grew louder as we approached the edge of the ridge, where the path narrowed and hugged the contour of the steep slope. Below us, the falls dropped in a series of dramatic plunges, the water shattering into mist and spray as it struck outcroppings of ancient metamorphic rock. "Chen," Martinez called out periodically. "David Chen, Forest Service." I joined in the calls, but something told me they were futile. If Chen had disappeared in the same way as the Turner family, he wouldn't be found by conventional search methods. As we moved further along the ridge, the maintained trail gradually gave way to a game path, narrower and less distinct. Martinez looked uncertain. "Should we turn back? This doesn't look like a path a casual hiker would take." "Chen wasn't a casual hiker," I replied. "His social media showed him on some pretty challenging terrain. And look there." I pointed to a broken branch ahead, its fresh white inner wood exposed. "Someone's passed this way recently." Martinez nodded, conceding the point, and we pressed on. The game trail led us deeper into the forest, eventually bending away from the ridge and the sound of the falls. The trees here were massive old-growth giants that had somehow escaped the logging operations of the previous century. Shafts of sunlight penetrated the canopy at steep angles, creating a cathedral-like atmosphere on the forest floor, where very old trees still stand. My pace slowed as I scanned our surroundings more carefully. There was something different about this section of foresta quality to the light, perhaps, or the unusual silence. No birds called, no squirrels chattered. Even the ever-present background rustle of insects seemed muted. "You feel that?" I asked Martinez quietly. "Feel what?" "The stillness." He paused, looking around. "Now that you mention it, yeah. It's weird. Like the forest is holding its breath or something." He gave a nervous laugh. "Sorry, that sounded stupid." "No, it's a good description," I assured him, unslinging my pack to retrieve my water bottle. As I took a drink, I discreetly touched the two objects in my pocket, my grandfather's eagle amulet and Joseph's speaking stone. Both felt unusually warm. A flicker of movement caught my eye, something dark passing between distant trees. I froze, water bottle halfway to my lips. "What is it?" Martinez asked, instantly alert. "Thought I saw something moving over there," I said, pointing. "Could be our missing hiker." Martinez raised his binoculars, scanning the area I'd indicated. "I don't see anything. Want to check it out?" I hesitated, suddenly reluctant to lead my partner deeper into what my instincts were screaming might be danger. "Why don't you stay here, maintain our position? I'll do a quick recon and be back in 10 minutes. Martinez frowned. "Protocol is to stay with your partner." "I know, but if it is Chen, he might be injured or disoriented. One person might seem less threatening." I was already removing my heavy pack, keeping only essential gear in my smaller belt pouches. "If I'm not back in 15 minutes, radio for backup and come looking for me. Deal?" He still looked uncertain but nodded. 15 minutes, not a second more. I moved off in the direction where I'd seen the movement, walking quietly but not attempting complete stealth. If it was Chen, I didn't want to startle him. If it was something else, something like what I'd encountered in the cave well, I suspected it already knew exactly where I was. The forest grew denser as I moved away from the game trail, the undergrowth thicker, forcing me to weave between mountain laurel thickets and around fallen logs covered in thick carpets of moss. The quality of light changed subtly, taking on a greenish tinge that reminded me of the phosphorescence in the underground chamber. After about 5 minutes of careful progress, I stepped into a small clearing and stopped short. At the center stood a massive oak tree, far larger than any I'd seen in these mountains before. Its trunk must have been at least 10 feet in diameter, its sprawling branches creating a canopy that overshadowed the entire clearing. The ground around it was carpeted with ferns that seemed to glow with an inner light, though I told myself it must be a trick of the filtered sunlight. But what truly arrested my attention was the figure standing on the far side of the clearing, partially obscured by the enormous trunk of the oak. It wasn't David Chen, it wasn't human at all. Even half hidden by the tree, I could see it was one of the creatures the Guardians, as Joseph had called them, similar to the one I'd encountered in the cave, but different in subtle ways. This one seemed slightly smaller, its fur lighter in color with silvery streaks, its posture more upright and alert. I stood frozen, unsure whether to retreat or approach. The creature made the decision for me, stepping fully into view and making that same resonant vocalization I'd heard in the cave. This time, with Joseph's speaking stone warm in my pocket, the translation in my mind was clearer, less like random thoughts and more like actual language. "You have come, Salagi Guardian. The forest has called, and you have answered." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "I'm looking for a missing person, a human named David Chen. Have you seen him?" The creature tilted its head, those unsettling obsidian eyes reflecting the strange green light of the clearing. The seeker of images has passed between. He followed willingly, as the others before him. "Passed between what?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "The boundaries thin, the ways open, the great renewal approaches." Frustration surged through me. "That's not an answer. Where is he? Where are the Turners? Are they safe?" The creature made a gesture with one massive, long-fingered hand surprisingly delicate for its size toward the great oak. "See for yourself, Guardian." I approached cautiously, circling around to where the creature indicated. There, at the base of the massive tree, was a dark opening, not a typical hollow such as you might find in an old tree, but an actual doorway, arched and smooth-edged, leading into darkness. "The way between stands open at the joining of sun and shadow," the creature continued. "Enter if you wish to find those who have passed." "The joining of sun and shadow?" I repeated, confused. "What you call dusk, the between time." I glanced at my watch, startled to see it was nearly 6:30 p.m. How had so much time passed? I'd told Martinez I'd be back in 15 minutes, and that had been. I couldn't actually remember how long ago. "My partner," I said, suddenly concerned. "He'll be looking for me." "Time moves differently at the boundaries," the creature explained, as if sensing my confusion. "Your companion still waits where you left him. For him, barely moments have passed." That should have been impossible, yet somehow I believed it. I turned back to the dark opening in the tree trunk. "If I go through there, will I find David Chen and the Turner family?" "You will find what you seek, Guardian. But be warned, the other side follows different rules. The path you take depends on what you carry within." "What does that mean?" Instead of answering, the creature made another of those resonant vocalizations, this one somehow conveying urgency. "Decide quickly. The way closes as the between time passes." I looked back in the direction I'd come from, thinking of Martinez waiting for me, of my duties as a Forest Service ranger, of the search teams combing the mountains for a man who apparently wasn't there anymore. Then I thought of Lily Turner in the hospital, asking about her parents and brother, of David Chen's friends and family waiting for news. "If I go through, can I come back?" "If you carry the Guardian and the Speaking Stone, yes. They anchor you to your world." I touched my pocket where both objects rested. "And the missing people? Can they return too?" "If they wish it. If they have not gone too far beyond." The implications of that statement were troubling, but I didn't have time to parse them. The light in the clearing was shifting, the strange green glow intensifying as the natural daylight faded. Decide, guardian. I took a deep breath, centering myself. What I was considering was beyond rational explanation, beyond my training, beyond anything I'd ever believed possible before that encounter in the cave. And yet, "I'll go," I said firmly, "but I'll be bringing them back." The creature made a sound that might have been laughter, a deep, rumbling vibration that I felt in my chest. "We shall see, guardian. We shall see." I approached the opening in the tree trunk, which now seemed to shimmer slightly at the edges, as if the boundary between it and the surrounding wood was not entirely stable. Up close I could see that it wasn't truly dark inside. There was a strange pearlescent light emanating from somewhere within. Gripping the eagle amulet and speaking stone in my pocket like talismans, I ducked my head and stepped through the opening. The sensation was indescribable, like stepping through a curtain of cool water that somehow didn't wet me, accompanied by a sudden shift in pressure that made my ears pop. For a moment I felt completely disoriented, unsure which way was up or down, forward or back. Then my boots touched solid ground, and the world steadied around me. I was standing in a forest, but not the one I had just left. The trees here were impossibly tall and strangely shaped, with smooth, pale bark that seemed to glow faintly from within. The foliage was dense, but unlike any plants I recognized, fern-like structures with translucent fronds that pulsed with subtle color changes, fungi that spiraled up tree trunks in geometric patterns, flowers that opened and closed as if breathing. The sky visible through gaps in the canopy was not blue, but a deep violet streaked with bands of green and gold. There was light, but no sun that I could see, just a general illumination that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. And the air, it felt thicker somehow, more substantial, carrying scents I had no words for and a subtle vibration that I could feel against my skin. I turned back, half expecting to see the oak tree I'd stepped through, but there was only an archway formed by two pale, luminescent trees that had grown and twisted together. Through it I could see a misty, indistinct view of what might have been the clearing I'd left behind, but it looked distant and unreal, like a reflection in disturbed water. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding oddly muffled in the thick air. "David Chen? Mr. and Mrs. Turner? Jake?" No human voice answered, but the forest around me seemed to respond to my call, the pulsing of the translucent fronds accelerating, the spiral fungi glowing more brightly, a susurration moving through the canopy above like a wave. I began to walk, choosing a direction that led deeper into this impossible forest, away from the archway. Some instinct told me that water who I sought would be found by moving forward, not by lingering near the boundary. The ground beneath my feet was soft and slightly springy, covered in what looked like moss but glittered as if embedded with tiny crystals. My footsteps left brief glowing impressions that faded after a few seconds. The whole environment felt alive in a way that was both wondrous and unsettling, not just populated by living things, but itself a vast, conscious entity. I walked for what seemed like hours, but might have been minutest time, as the creature had warned, seemed to function differently here. The forest gradually changed around me, the trees growing more widely spaced, the ground becoming firmer. Ahead, I could see what appeared to be structures, not natural formations, but deliberate constructions rising among the trees. As I drew closer, I saw they were buildings of a sort, though unlike any architecture I'd seen before. They seemed to be grown rather than built, their walls formed from living wood that had been guided into arches, domes, and sweeping curves. Crystalline formations were integrated into the structures, catching and refracting the omnipresent light in dazzling patterns. And there were beings moving among these structures, some clearly the same species as the guardians I had encountered, their massive fur-covered forms unmistakable. But there were others too, smaller, more delicate creatures with elongated limbs and iridescent skin, floating luminous orbs that pulsed with changing colors, and most surprisingly, humans. At least they looked mostly human. As I watched from the shelter of the last line of trees, I noticed subtle differences, strange fluidity to their movements, an unnatural stillness when they weren't moving, and most strikingly, a faint luminosity to their skin similar to the trees around them. I focused on a small group gathered near one of the larger structures. There were 3 of them, 2 adult-sized and 1 adolescent, their backs to me. Something about their proportions, the way they stood, sparked recognition. Moving as quietly as possible, I approached the group, circling to see their faces. My suspicion was confirmed. It was Michael and Rebecca Turner, with their teenage son Jake, but they were changed. Their eyes had the same obsidian quality as the Guardian's, reflecting light in unnatural ways. Their skin had taken on the faint luminescence I'd noticed from a distance, and they moved with an otherworldly grace that no human should possess. "Mr. Turner," I called cautiously. "Michael Turner?" The three turned as one, fixing those unsettling reflective eyes on me. For a moment there was no recognition in their faces, only an alien curiosity. Then Michael Turner's expression shifted, something human reasserting itself. "The Ranger," he said, his voice carrying the same resonant quality as the Guardian's vocalizations. "You found us." "I've been looking for you," I confirmed, approaching slowly. "Your daughter Lily is safe. She's waiting for you to come home." At the mention of Lily, Rebecca Turner's face showed a flicker of emotion, concern, longing. I couldn't quite tell. "Lily," she repeated, as if testing the sound of the name. "Our youngest. She did not follow." "She was scared," I explained. "She hid. I found her and brought her out of the cave." The three exchanged glances, communicating in some way I couldn't perceive. Then Jake, the teenage son, spoke. "She was not ready. We were." "Ready for what?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "The transformation," Michael replied, spreading his arms to indicate the strange forest and structures around us. "The great renewal approaches, the boundaries between worlds thin. Those who are prepared must help bridge the gap." "Bridge it how?" "What is this great renewal?" Rebecca stepped forward, her movements liquid and unsettling. "The cycle turns. Worlds that were separated must become one again. It has happened before, long ago. It will happen again." "And you're helping this happen?" I asked, struggling to understand. "We are becoming," Jake said, his adolescent voice overlaid with harmonics no human vocal cords should produce. "Neither fully human nor fully other. Bridge, people who can exist in both realms." I looked at them more carefully, noting how the strange luminescence seemed to pulse beneath their skin, how their eyes reflected light that wasn't there, how they seemed both solid and somehow permeable at the edges. They were changing, becoming something other than human, and the process appeared to be ongoing. "Can you come back?" I asked directly. "Can you return to our world?" Again, that silent communication between them. Then Michael answered, "We could for a time, but we would not stay. Our path lies here now." "What about Lily?" I pressed. "She's just a child. She needs her family." "Lily will be cared for," Rebecca said, and for the first time I heard real emotion in her voice, a mother's concern. "There are others of our kind who remain in your world, who appear human but serve as watchers and guides. They will ensure she is placed with those who will love her." "Others of your kind? You mean you're not the first to go through this transformation?" "It has been happening for generations," Michael explained. "Slowly at first, just a few who heard the call. But as the great renewal approaches, the call grows stronger and more answer." I thought of David Chen, the missing hiker. There was another man who disappeared recently, a photographer named David Chen. "Is he here too?" Jake pointed toward another structure nearby. "The image catcher. He follows a different path than ours. His transformation has just begun." I looked where he indicated and saw a solitary figure sitting cross-legged before what appeared to be a pool of silvery liquid. Even from a distance I recognized David Chen from his search photos, though like the Turners, he too was beginning to change, his outline slightly blurred, his skin taking on that same subtle luminescence. "I need to speak with him," I said, already moving in that direction. None of the Turners tried to stop me, though Rebecca called after me. "He may not wish to return either, Guardian. The visions he has seen here are beyond anything his camera could capture in your world." I approached Chen cautiously, not wanting to startle him. He seemed to be in a trance-like state, staring into the silver pool before him, which I now saw was reflecting not his face but a series of impossible landscapes, vistas of crystal mountains, floating islands, vast luminous caverns. "Mr. Chen," I said softly. "David Chen? I'm Ranger Wohali from the U.S. Forest Service." He looked up slowly, his eyes already beginning to show the obsidian quality I'd seen in the Turners, though less pronounced. "A ranger?" he said, his voice dreamy and distant, from the other side. "Yes, people are looking for you. Your friends are worried." He smiled faintly. "I was looking too, all my life, looking for something beyond the ordinary, something transcendent. He gestured to the pool of images before him. And now I've found it. What happened to you? I asked. How did you get here? I was photographing the falls at sunset. The light was unusual. I saw a doorway in the rocks behind the water. I thought it was a cave entrance, something that would give me a unique perspective for a shot. His expression turned to one of wonder, but it was so much more. Did you encounter one of the guardians? A large, fur-covered being? Chen nodded. She spoke in my mind, showed me visions of what this place could teach me, about light, about perception, about reality itself. He looked down at his hands, which were beginning to show the same subtle blurring at the edges that I'd noticed in the turners. I'm changing, becoming something more than I was. Why would I want to go back? I crouched down to his level, trying to establish a more direct connection. Because people care about you, because your disappearance is causing pain to those who love you. Something flickered in his transforming eyes, a moment of human concern, quickly subsumed by the otherworldly calm that seemed to be overtaking him. They'll forget in time, he said dismissively, and I'll learn to reach across, to send them dreams of beauty to ease their grief. I realized I was losing him, that the transformation was progressing too quickly for my appeals to human connection to have much effect. I changed tactics. What if you could come back occasionally? Document this place, share what you've discovered. Wouldn't that be valuable to be a bridge between worlds in a different way? That caught his attention. His expression sharpened, becoming more present, more human. They wouldn't believe. They'd think the images were manipulated, fabricated. Some would, I agreed, but others might see the truth in them. Isn't that what you've always wanted as a photographer? To show people a reality they couldn't see themselves? He stared at me for a long moment, then back at the pool of shifting images. Perhaps, he said finally. A bridge. Yes, that has symmetry. I pressed my advantage. But to do that, you need to come back with me now, before your transformation goes too far. The Turners are already beyond returning permanently, but you still have a choice. Chen looked around at the impossible forest, the crystalline structures, the strange beings moving among them. Longing was clear on his face, but something else too, a recognition of what he would be giving up if he stayed. I could come back here, he asked. After? I believe so, I said, hoping I wasn't lying. The boundaries are thinning, as they say. The ways between worlds are opening. But right now, people are searching for you. They need to know you're safe. He was silent for a long time, his gaze returning to the pool of images. Finally, he nodded once, decisively. I'll come with you. For now. Relief washed through me. At least I wouldn't be returning empty-handed. I helped Chen to his feet, noticing how light he seemed, as if gravity had less hold on him than it should. We made our way back to where the Turners still stood, watching us with those unsettling, reflective eyes. He's coming back with me, I told them. Will you reconsider as well, for Lily's sake? Michael shook his head. Our path is set. But tell Lily that we love her, that we will watch over her in ways she cannot see, and that perhaps, when she has grown, she may choose to follow if the call comes to her. Rebecca stepped forward and pressed something into my hand, a small crystal that pulsed with inner light. Give her this. It will help her understand, when she's ready. I pocketed the crystal alongside the amulet and speaking stone, then asked, How do we get back the way I came in? The Guardian will show you, Michael said, looking past me. I turned to find one of the massive guardians standing silently behind us, the same silvery-streaked one who had guided me to the entrance in the great oak. The between-time ends soon, its thoughts reverberated in my mind. We must hurry if the image seeker is to cross back with his humanity intact. Without waiting for a response, it turned and began moving through the strange forest with surprising grace for its size. Chen and I followed, leaving the Turners behind without further farewell. The journey back seemed both longer and shorter than my inward journey, the forest changing around us in ways that made no logical sense, paths appearing and disappearing, distances contracting and expanding. Throughout, the Guardian led us unerringly, never hesitating at junctions or seeming confused by the shifting landscape. Finally, we arrived back at the archway formed by the two twisted, luminescent trees. Through it I could see the clearing with the massive oak, though the view was still distorted and misty, as if seen through disturbed water. The crossing will be more difficult for him, the Guardian communicated, indicating Chen. His transformation has begun. He must focus on what anchors him to your world. I turned to Chen, who was staring at the archway with a mixture of reluctance and determination. Think about your friends, your family. I instructed him. The people waiting for you. Hold those connections in your mind as we cross. He nodded, his expression becoming more focused, more human. I'm ready. Take his hand, the Guardian instructed me. Your connection to your world is stronger. It will help guide him. I grasped Chen's hand, noting how it felt slightly insubstantial, as if not quite solid, and together we approached the archway. At the threshold, I felt that same disorienting sensation I'd experienced when entering. The feeling of passing through a curtain of cool water, the pressure change making my ears pop. Then we were through, standing in the clearing with the massive oak tree. The light had changed at twilight, was deepening into true night, the last colors fading from the sky. The between time was ending. Chen staggered, nearly falling, and I caught him by the shoulders. His appearance had solidified somewhat in the crossing, the blurriness at his edges receding, but his eyes still held that unsettling reflective quality, and his skin retained a subtle luminescence that would be noticeable in darkness. Are you okay? I asked him. He nodded, though he seemed dazed. It's harder to breathe here, heavier. The colors are muted. I looked around the clearing, but the Guardian was nowhere to be seen. The entrance in the oak tree had vanished as well, the trunk now solid and unbroken. Only the unnatural stillness of the forest remained as evidence that anything unusual had occurred. We need to get back to my partner and the search teams, I said, orienting myself. They'll be worried. Chen nodded again, seeming to gather himself with effort. Yes, the search. For me. He gave a slightly bitter laugh. How do I explain where I've been? You don't have to, I assured him. People get lost in these mountains all the time. Disorientation, confusion, it's common enough that no one will question it too deeply. We began making our way back toward where I'd left Martinez, Chen moving with an odd grace that didn't quite match his surroundings, as if he was still partially attuned to the physics of the other world. I found myself wondering how long he would be able to remain in our world, whether the transformation would continue despite his return, and what would happen if it did. As we neared the spot where I'd separated from Martinez, I heard voices calling not just his, but multiple searchers. Flashlight beams crisscrossed through the darkening forest ahead. We're here, I shouted. Ranger Wohali, I've found Chen. The beams swung in our direction, and moments later we were surrounded by search team members, Martinez among them, his expression a mixture of relief and annoyance. 15 minutes, you said, he reprimanded me. It's been almost 2 hours. I thought you'd fallen off the damn ridge. 2 hours? It had felt like much longer on the other side. Sorry, I said. Lost track of time, but I found him. I indicated Chen, who was standing quietly, his eyes downcast as if to hide their unnatural quality. The search team leader, a veteran ranger named Hodges, approached Chen with professional concern. Mr. Chen, are you injured? Do you need medical attention? Chen shook his head. I'm fine. Just got turned around. The ranger found me before I could get into real trouble. Hodges didn't look entirely convinced there was something off about Chen's manner. His speech pattern slightly too formal, his movements too fluid, but he didn't press the issue. Well, let's get you both back to the command post. There's a lot of people been worried about you, Mr. Chen. As the search team escorted us back toward the Whitewater Falls parking area, Martinez fell into step beside me. So where exactly did you find him? We searched that whole area twice. I gave a non-committal shrug. You know how it is. People can be right under your nose in this terrain and stay hidden, especially if they're disoriented and not responding to calls. Martinez looked like he wanted to ask more questions, but something in my expression must have discouraged him. He just nodded and said, Well, good work finding him. One for the win column. Yeah, I agreed, watching Chen walking ahead of us, surrounded by search team members but somehow apart from them, like a visitor from another world trying to mimic human behavior. In a way, that's exactly what he was. One for the win column. But as I felt the crystal from Rebecca Turner pulse warmly in my pocket alongside my grandfather's amulet and Joseph's speaking stone, I knew the story was far from over. The great renewal the Turners had spoken of, the thinning of boundaries between worlds, The transformations, all of it was still unfolding, with consequences I couldn't begin to predict. And somehow, I had become a part of Eta Guardian straddling two worlds, responsible for those caught in between. 3 days after bringing David Chen back from the other world, I stood on the porch of my ranger station cabin, watching the sunrise paint the autumn forest in hues of gold and crimson. My administrative leave had been extended pending a formal review of both the Turner case and the Chen rescue, but the suspension felt more like a formality than a punishment. My superiors seemed eager to move past the incidents, filing them away as successful rescues despite the lingering mysteries. David Chen had been debriefed, examined by medical personnel, and released to friends who had driven down from Asheville. The official report stated he had become disoriented while photographing Whitewater Falls, wandered off trail, and survived by finding shelter in a rock overhang for 2 days. His slightly unusual affect and mannerisms were attributed to dehydration and psychological stress from the ordeal. Only I knew the truth that Chen was irrevocably changed by his time in the other world, caught between human and other. Before his friends took him back to Asheville, he had spoken to me privately, his now permanently reflective eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. "I can still see it," he told me, his voice carrying that subtle, resonant quality that marked him as different. "When I close my eyes, when I'm falling asleep, the forest between worlds is still there, calling to me." "Are you going to answer that call?" I had asked him. His expression had been conflicted. "Not yet. I have things to do here first, people to say goodbye to properly, and," he'd hesitated, "I want to try what you suggested. To be a bridge, to show others what I've seen, even if they don't fully understand what they're looking at." He'd handed me a business card with his contact information. "When the time comes when what the Guardians call the Great Renewal is closer, find me. I want to document it." I'd promised I would, though I had no real understanding of when or how this Great Renewal might manifest. All I knew for certain was that the boundaries between worlds were thinning, that people who were somehow attuned to the other world were being called across, and that something significant was approaching, something that would affect both realms. The sound of tires on gravel broke into my thoughts. A familiar old pickup truck was coming up the station access road, Joseph Walkingstick's vehicle. I wasn't surprised to see him. Somehow, I'd been expecting his return. "Sio Kanati," he greeted me as he climbed somewhat stiffly from the truck. I felt it was time we spoke again. I nodded, gesturing to the chairs on the porch. "Coffee? Please." Once we were settled with steaming mugs, Joseph fixed me with that penetrating gaze that seemed to look through rather than at me. "You crossed over," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I found the Turner family, and David Chen, but only brought one back." I nodded, sipping my coffee to gather my thoughts. The Turners had changed too much. They chose to stay. They're becoming something neither fully human nor fully whatever the others are. "The Yunwi Tsunsti," Joseph supplied. "The little people, though some are not so little anymore. The Guardians you encountered are among the largest and oldest. They spoke of something called the Great Renewal," I said. "Said the boundaries between worlds were thinning, that soon the separate realms would become one again as they had been long ago. Do you know what that means?" Joseph was silent for a long moment, his weathered hands wrapped around his mug. "There are stories," he finally said, "passed down through generations of medicine people. Stories of a time when the worlds were not separated, when spirits and humans and animals all shared the same realm and could speak to one another freely. What happened? Why did they separate?" "Imbalance," Joseph said simply. "Humans began to take more than they gave. They forgot the sacred reciprocity that maintained harmony. So the worlds were divided, humans in the middle world, spirits in the upper and lower worlds, with boundaries established that could only be crossed in special places and at special times, or by those with particular gifts. And now those boundaries are breaking down?" Joseph nodded. "The old stories say that the separation was not meant to be permanent, that after a great cycle of time what some call the world renewal cyclic boundaries would thin again, allowing for a return to the original state of unity. But," he raised a cautionary finger, "the transition is dangerous. Not all beings from the other realms are benevolent. Some were imprisoned in the lower world because they brought chaos and destruction." I thought of what the Guardian had told me. Not all spirits are benevolent. Some were imprisoned in the underworld for good reason. "So what happens now?" I asked. How long do we have before this great renewal occurs? The signs suggest it is already beginning, Joseph said gravely. The increased appearances of the guardians, the calling of sensitive humans across the boundaries, the awakening of ancient sites that have been dormant for generations. These are all indicators that the cycle is approaching its culmination. And when it culminates, what then? That depends, he said, on whether the transition is managed properly. If the boundaries dissolve in a controlled way, with proper guidance from those who understand both realms, then a new era of harmony might emerge. But if the dissolution is chaotic, if the wrong entities cross first and gain influence— He left the sentence unfinished, but his expression conveyed the seriousness of such an outcome. And where do I fit into all this? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. Joseph smiled faintly. You are Salagi, of the old bloodlines. You carry a guardian spirit. He nodded toward my pocket where the eagle amulet rested. You have crossed between worlds and returned. The guardians know you now, recognize you. Whether you wish it or not, you have become a bridge walkerone who can move between realms and influence how the reunion unfolds. I sighed, looking out at the forest stretching before us, its autumn colors vibrant in the morning light. To most eyes, it was simply a beautiful woodland. Now I knew it was much more a thin veil over another reality that was pressing ever closer to our own. I'm just a park ranger, I said, not entirely convinced of my own words. You are that, Joseph agreed. And what better role for one who must help protect both worlds as they reconnect? You already guard the forest and those who visit it. Now you must expand that guardianship to include the beings and forces that exist beyond ordinary perception. I don't know how, I admitted. You have already begun, he assured me, by respecting the old ways while working within the new, by rescuing those who can be rescued and accepting the choices of those who choose to cross over, by understanding that your duty extends to all beings, not just humans. He reached into his pocket and withdrew something wrapped in soft leather, another speaking stone, this one pure white with veins of gold running through it. This is for calling across boundaries, he explained, placing it in my palm. When you need to communicate with the guardians but cannot find a natural crossing point, this will help your thoughts reach them. I accepted it, feeling the now familiar warmth radiating from the stone. Thank you. There is one more thing you should know, Joseph said, his expression growing more serious. The young one, Lily Turner. She has been placed with her aunt who lives in Asheville. But the child is not entirely unchanged by her experience. I straightened in my chair. What do you mean? She seemed normal when I found her, just frightened and confused. The boundaries affected her differently than her family. She resisted the full transformation, yes, but having been in the cave, having been in proximity to the guardians and the energies of the other world, it has awakened something in her. Abilities that were dormant. What kind of abilities? Sight beyond ordinary sight. Dreams that show her things no child should see. The beginnings of what my people would call medicine power. Joseph's gaze was steady. She will need guidance, Kanati. Guidance from someone who understands what she has experienced, who has walked between worlds themselves. I thought of the crystal Rebecca Turner had given me, meant for her daughter. I have something for her, from her mother. Joseph nodded approvingly. Good. It will help her understand her connection to her family, even across the boundaries. But she will need more than that. She will need you. The responsibility settled over me like a weight, not just for the forest and its visitors, not just for the balance between worlds, but for this child caught in between, much as I was. I'll do what I can, I promised. Joseph seemed satisfied. He finished his coffee and set the mug aside. The coming months will bring more crossings, more instances of the boundaries thinning. Watch for the signs: unusual animal behavior, unexplained phenomena, people drawn to specific locations as if called. The pattern of crossings may reveal something about how the great renewal will unfold. And how do I know which crossings to prevent and which to allow? Trust your instincts, Kanati. The Eagle Guardian will help guide your judgment. He rose stiffly from his chair. I should go, but we will speak again as events progress. I walked him to his truck, my mind churning with everything he had told me. As he was about to climb in, he paused and turned to me one last time. Remember, Kanati, you are not alone in this. There are others like you, bridge, walkers of different traditions, all working to ensure the reunion of worlds happens with minimal harm. In time, you will meet them. With that cryptic statement, he departed, the old pickup raising dust as it disappeared down the gravel road. I returned to the porch, gazing out at the forest with new awareness. Somewhere beyond the trees I could see, beyond the reality most people perceived, another world was drawing closer, a world of impossible beauty and unknown dangers, of beings both wondrous and terrifying. And I, Kanadia Dohi Wohali, park ranger and reluctant bridge walker, would stand at the crossroads between them. 2 weeks later, I found myself driving through the outskirts of Asheville, following directions to the home of Margaret Turner, Lily's aunt and now legal guardian. The girl had been released from the hospital after thorough medical and psychological evaluations found nothing officially concerning, though the psychologist's notes mentioned unusual thought patterns and vivid imaginative constructs that they attributed to trauma from being lost in the forest. I had called ahead, explaining I was the ranger who had found Lily and that I had something personal to give her from the search operation. Margaret had been cautiously receptive, agreeing to a brief visit. The house was a modest bungalow on a quiet street, with a well-tended garden and wind chimes hanging from the porch. As I approached the front door, crystal from Rebecca Turner in my pocket alongside my amulet and the 2 speaking stones, I felt an unexpected nervousness. What if the crystal triggered something in Lily, some acceleration of the abilities Joseph had mentioned? What if it caused her pain or fear? Before I could reconsider, the door opened. A woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and worry lines stood there, looking at me appraisingly. "Ranger Wohali?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for agreeing to see me." She nodded and stepped aside. "Lily's in the backyard. She spends most of her time there now, watching the birds. She's been different since coming to live with me. Quieter, more observant." I followed her through the house to a back door that opened onto a small yard bordered by mature trees. Lily sat cross-legged on the grass, perfectly still, her gaze fixed on a large oak where several birds were perched. "Lily," Margaret called softly, "the ranger who found you has come to visit. Ranger Wohali." The girl turned, and I felt a shock of recognition. Her eyes, while not obsidian like her transformed family members, had a depth and awareness that hadn't been there in the cave. She looked at me not as a child looks at an adult, but as one initiated looks at another. "You came back," she said simply, rising to her feet with a fluid grace that reminded me uncomfortably of David Chen after his partial transformation. "Yes," I replied, moving closer and crouching to her level. "I wanted to see how you were doing, and I have something for you." Margaret hovered nearby, protective but uncertain. "Would you like some privacy? I could make some lemonade." Lily glanced at her aunt. "It's okay, Aunt Maggie. The ranger understands about the shiny people. He saw them too." Margaret's expression tightened slightly. Clearly, this was something she'd heard before and attributed to trauma-induced fantasy. "All right, honey. I'll be just inside if you need me." She retreated to the house, casting one concerned look back at us before closing the door. Once we were alone, Lily's demeanor changed, subtly became more focused, more present. "You went there, didn't you, to the other forest? You saw my family." I nodded, impressed and slightly unnerved by her perception. "Yes, I did. They asked me to give you something." I reached into my pocket and withdrew the crystal, which seemed to pulse with inner light even in the bright afternoon sun. Lily showed no surprise at the sight of it. She held out her small hand, and I placed the crystal on her palm. Immediately it glowed more brightly, responding to her touch. "It's from my mom," she said with certainty. "I can feel her in it." "Yes, she wanted you to have it. She said it would help you understand, when you're ready." Lily closed her fingers around the crystal, and for a moment her expression became distant, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Then she refocused on me. "They're not coming back, are they?" The directness of the question caught me off guard, but I owed her honesty. "No, I don't think so. Not permanently. They've changed too much." She nodded, accepting this with a composure no 9-year-old should possess. "I know. I can feel them sometimes, especially when I'm dreaming. They're different now. Part of something bigger." "Does that frighten you?" I asked gently. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not because of them, but because of what's coming. The great renewal." I tried to hide my shock at hearing those words from her lips. "What do you know about the great renewal, Lily?" She looked up at the birds in the oak tree, then back to me. "It's like when the seasons change, but bigger. Everything changing all at once." the walls between here and there getting thinner until they're gone. Her small face grew troubled. But some of the things that want to come through are bad. I see them in my dreams. Dark shapes with hungry eyes. A chill ran through me despite the warm day. Her description matched what both Joseph and the Guardian had warned about dangerous entities from the lower world that might exploit the thinning boundaries. "That's why I'm here, Lily," I said, choosing my words carefully. "To help make sure that when the changes come, the bad things don't get through, and I could use your help with that." "My help?" Her expression brightened with surprise and a hint of pride. "Yes, you have a special connection to both worlds now. You can sense things others can't. If you notice anything unusual, strange dreams, feelings, animals behaving oddly, you can tell me or your aunt." "Aunt Maggie doesn't believe me," Lily said matter-of-factly. "She thinks I'm making up stories to cope with trauma. That's what the doctor told her." "Then you can call me directly," I said, taking out a business card and writing my personal cell number on the back, anytime, day or night. She took the card solemnly, studying it before slipping it into her pocket alongside the crystal. "The birds tell me things," she said abruptly. "They see the thin places where the worlds touch. There's one forming in the park downtown, by the big fountain. The water and the stone make a doorway." "Where water meets stone," Joseph had said. "One of the places where boundaries naturally thin." "When?" I asked, taking her seriously. "Soon, at the dark of the moon." She looked up at the sky, though the moon wasn't visible in the daylight. 3 days from now." I made a mental note to check the lunar calendar and to visit the downtown park she mentioned. "Thank you for telling me, Lily. That's exactly the kind of help I need." She smiled then, a normal child's smile that momentarily banished the unsettling awareness in her eyes. "You're welcome, Mr. Ranger. Will you come visit again?" "As often as I can," I promised. "And remember, you can call me any time." Our conversation was interrupted by Margaret opening the back door. "Lemonade's ready if you'd like some," she called. I rose from my crouched position. "I should be going, but thank you, Mrs. Turner." Lily looked up at me, her expression suddenly urgent. "Be careful at the fountain. Not everything that comes through will look dangerous at first." With that cryptic warning, she turned and ran to her aunt, transforming back into an ordinary child with an ordinary child's enthusiasm for lemonade. But the knowing look she cast back at me confirmed what Joseph had said. She was changed, awakened to perceptions most humans would never experience. As I drove back toward Cherokee National Forest, my mind was already planning for the dark of the moon, 3 days hence. If Lily was right and something told me she was, I would witness my first boundary crossing from this side. The great renewal was accelerating. The time for preparation was growing short. And somehow, I had become a guardian not just of the forest, but of the very fabric of reality itself. As the mountains rose before me, ancient and enduring, I felt both the weight of that responsibility and, surprisingly, a growing sense of purpose. Whatever came through at the fountain, whatever the great renewal might bring, I would face it as both a modern park ranger and a Salagi guardian of the old ways. The forest was calling, and I would answer. Before you go, a quick reminder. I only have 2 official channels, Midnight Stories with 24,000 subscribers and Mr. Midnight with 6,000 subscribers. If you ever see my content on any other channel, it is stolen. Please report it right away. Thank you for your support.